Marineford was the day the world watched a legend die, a war that shattered the seas and scarred Luffy forever. But what if the blood on that battlefield didn't end with Ace? Picture this. We're at the exact same moment. Ace has just fallen, Luffy is unconscious, and the war is reaching its breaking point. In the original timeline, Shanks walks through the smoke like a savior, blocks akainu, and declares the fighting over. But in this timeline, he does something that instantly freezes everyone. He grabs Luffy by the collar, lifts his limp body into the air, and turns not to akainu, but to Sengoku. "End the war," Shanks says calmly, eyes cold. "And I'll hand over the boy." The entire plaza stops. Whitebeard's men, the Marines, even the sky itself feels like it's holding its breath. Because you see, Luffy isn't just any pirate. He's the holder of the fruit Shanks stole from the world government. The boy Shanks bet his arm on, the supposed future of the new age, and now, in front of everyone, the red-haired Yonko is offering him up like a bargaining chip. But what if this wasn't a sudden turn? What if the betrayal started way back in Fuchsia Village? Think about that day. The hat changed hands. In the original timeline, it's the birth of Luffy's dream. But what if, when Shanks placed that straw hat on Luffy's head, he wasn't just inspiring a kid, he was marking a piece on the board, raising the perfect Joy Boy candidate only to control him, or kill him, the moment the drums of liberation finally rang. Now fast forward, Marineford again. In one branch of this timeline, Shanks hands Luffy to the Marines and walks away with a secret deal from the Gorosei, and using his strange access to Mary Joaz to rewrite the entire Yonko balance. In another, he pretends to save Luffy, but from that day on, every move is a setup. Every protection is just keeping the pawn alive until it's time to cash him in. Jump ahead to Wano. In the original timeline, we imagine Shanks arriving as the cool uncle, late but reliable. But what if he showed up over Onigashima not as an ally, but as an executioner? Luffy exhausted after Kaido, Gear 5 fading, and suddenly a red-haired silhouette blocks the moon. Does he cut Luffy down before Joy Boy can fully awaken? Or does he test him, blade to throat, to see if this sun god is worthy of his real plan? And then, the final island, Laugh Tale, the one piece in sight. What if the last person standing between Luffy and the truth isn't Blackbeard or Imu, but Shanks himself? Like the man who knew the Void Century secrets from the start. The man who walked into the Holy Land like it was his own. Here's the kicker. If Shanks is a traitor, this doesn't just break Luffy's heart. It rewrites the final villain of One Piece. It reshapes the Yonko system, the world government's hidden agenda, and even the meaning of Joy Boy. So what if the man who inspired Luffy to become a pirate was actually raising the perfect pawn to control or kill Joy Boy? Let's dive into multiple betrayal timelines, Marineford, Wano, and the final saga, where Shanks doesn't save Luffy. He dooms him. By the end, ladies and gentlemen, you'll never look at that red-haired smile or that straw hat the same way again. Choosing the knife. When would Shanks betray Luffy? So if Shanks is the doom flag, Ice, we need to choose the moment he flips the switch. Because depending on when that knife goes in, the entire world changes. You see, there isn't just one betrayal. There are three main windows where the story can split into completely different timelines. First, Fuchsia Village, Ground Zero. In the original timeline, Shanks loses his arm, saves Kid Luffy, laughs it off, and sails away after putting the straw hat on his head. That scene defines Luffy's entire life. But what if that's where the mask cracks? In this timeline, Fuchsia is all about psychology. Does Shanks intentionally feed Luffy the Gomu Gomu no Mi to bind Nika to his will? Does he stage the Sea King attack? Does he walk away not as a proud mentor, but as someone who just tagged a weapon for the future? This route answers how a betrayed, traumatized Luffy even forms a crew. If he ever trusts anyone, and whether the Straw Hats become darker, harsher versions of themselves. Second, Marineford, the midpoint betrayal. In the original timeline, Shanks arrives like a savior, stops the war, and protects Luffy's unconscious body from Akainu and everyone else. But what if that entrance is a lie? In this timeline, Marineford becomes the place where Shanks cashes in his secrets with the world government. Does he hand Luffy over to the Marines? Does he strike a deal with the Gorosei, using Ace's death and Whitebeard's fall as bargaining chips? This route is all about the power balance. Who replaces Whitebeard? What happens to Ace's legacy? How Blackbeard, Kaido, and Big Mom react when one Yonko is secretly working with the throne. Third, post-Wano, final saga. Luffy is Joy Boy, Gear 5 is awakened. The world is shaking. Shanks meets the Gorosei and Mary Joaz, walks into their chamber like he owns the place. In the original timeline, That scene is a mystery. But what if that was the moment he offered them a name? Monkey D. Luffy. In this timeline, the betrayal hits at the peak. We answer the biggest questions. Who gets the One Piece? Who the final villain really is? Emu, Blackbeard, or Shanks? And whether Joy Boy's return was guided or hijacked. Now, here's the kicker. We're not going to sit in just one route. We're going to jump between these three timelines fast, cinematic, back to back. One cut we're in Fuchsia with a bleeding Kid Luffy. Next cut we're at Marineford with Shanks standing over his body. Next cut we're in the final war with Joy Boy Luffy staring down his former hero. Every time, might we anchor to what actually happened in the original timeline so you never get lost. And under all of it, we're rereading every Shanks mystery, stealing the Gomu Gomu no Mi, that casual influence over Sengoku, that quiet talk with the Gorosei. But what if all of those were steps in a long-term betrayal plan? We'll rewrite battles, choices, and alliances and ask the real question. Does Luffy break, or does betrayal turn him into the scariest force this world has ever seen? Before the knife. Canon Shanks, Canon Luffy, Canon Promise. To feel how hard a betrayal would hit, we have to go back. Back to the tiny bar in Fuchsia Village, where the legend of Luffy and Shanks actually begins. In the original timeline, Shanks isn't a looming Yonko or a political wildcard yet. He's just that carefree red-haired pirate laughing with his crew. On getting drinks poured on him by bandits and refusing to even raise a fist over cheap insults. You see that refusal to fight? That's Luffy's first real lesson. Power isn't about ego. It's about choosing when to draw your blade. When Higuma humiliates Shanks, everyone in the bar expects violence. Instead, Shanks just laughs it off. But when Luffy is dragged out to sea and a Sea King lunges in for the kill, that same man who doesn't fight back suddenly moves without hesitation. One moment, Luffy is doomed. The next, the Sea King is gone, Shanks is missing an arm, and he's smiling. That smile is everything. It tells Luffy that his life was worth more than a limb. That pirates can be kind, fearless, and free. Shanks doesn't give a speech. He just stands on that boat, coat fluttering, and lets the silence say, "I chose you." From that day, Luffy doesn't want to be Roger or Whitebeard or some marine hero. He wants to be Shanks. And then comes the straw hat, the single most important item in Luffy's entire story. Shanks kneels, puts it on Luffy's head, and drops the line that defines the entire timeline. "Return this to me, when you've become a great pirate." He's not just lending a hat, he's handing over a dream, betting his arm on a new age, and tying Luffy's future to his own. That hat becomes Luffy's identity, his promise, his shield at Marineford, his symbol when Ace dies in his arms. While Luffy charges forward, Shanks rises in the background. Off-screen, he becomes a Yonko, one of the 4 emperors ruling the New World. He walks into Mary Joyce itself and talks directly to the Gorosei, something that instantly makes everyone watching go, "Wait, Shu how?" He steals the Gomu Gomu no Mi from a world government ship, the very fruit that awakens into Nika and shakes Marineford, Wano, and the entire world. At Marineford, that carefree man from Fuchsia suddenly steps onto the stage as a world-class force. He blocks Akainu's punch aimed at Kobe. He stands over Luffy's unconscious body, demanding the war end here and now. Whitebeard's remnants listen. The Marines listen. Sengoku accepts his terms. Shanks is the stabilizer, the heroic closer of the bloodiest war in the story. But what if that same man, always in the shadows, always half-revealed, isn't what he seems? Oda keeps his motives hidden, his true strength off-screen, his meetings with the Gorosei unexplained. Ladies and gentlemen, when a character is built like that, but he's perfectly placed for one terrifying twist, the day that smile, that hat, and that promise turn against Luffy. And the real question is not, could he betray? It's when in this timeline does the knife finally come down? 3 cuts in the timeline, our betrayal framework. So here's how we're going to slice this open. If Shanks is a traitor, the question isn't just, does he betray Luffy? It's, when does he pull the trigger? Because that timing instantly rewires the entire story. So we're building 3 cuts in the timeline, 3 routes where that knife lands at a different moment, and we're going to bounce between them like a twisted One Piece opening. Timeline A is Fuchsia Betrayal. This is where everything you thought was wholesome becomes grooming. In the original timeline, Shanks saves Kid Luffy from the Sea King, loses his arm, laughs it off, and puts the hat on his head as a symbol of faith in the next era. But what if every smile, every drink, every "you'll be a great pirate" was calculated? In this timeline, Shanks knows exactly what fruit Luffy ate, knows the legend of Nika, and is raising a Joy Boy candidate he plans to control, or hand over, before that power fully awakens. You see, suddenly, the arm he bet on the new age looks less like sacrifice and more like investment. He's testing how the world government reacts. He's measuring how dangerous Luffy is. Fuchsia becomes the lab where Shanks calibrates his perfect pawn. And the betrayal here doesn't even need chains or cuffs. It can be a single moment where he lures Teen Luffy to a marine ship under the promise of adventure and steps back. Timeline B is Marineford Betrayal. This is the one that hits the fandom nerve. In the original timeline, Shanks arrives like a savior, stops the war, and protects Luffy's unconscious body with nothing but his name. But what if that walk onto the battlefield was never about saving him? In this timeline, Shanks weaponizes that influence with Sengoku and the Gorosei. He offers a trade, the unconscious Nika vessel, in exchange for a secret deal about the Void Century, Laugh Tale, or even the safety of his own crew. Imagine it. Marineford still ends in silence. The red hair still blows in the wind. But Luffy is gone, vanished into a government vault, while Ace's death becomes the distraction. Everyone thinks Shanks saved him. Only a handful of monsters at the top know the truth. Timeline C is post-Wano betrayal. Now Luffy is Joy Boy, Gear 5 is real, and Shanks doesn't have to pretend anymore. In this timeline, he moves openly, either as the final gatekeeper to Laugh Tale or as a willing agent of the Old World Order. That friendly, "let's meet soon," becomes a summons to execution. The red-haired pirates don't arrive as allies. They arrive as the last wall between Luffy and the One Piece. Let's dive into how we're structuring this. First, we go all in on Fuchsia psychology, rereading every panel of that childhood bond as a slow burn setup. Then we rerun Marineford under betrayal conditions, flipping the most iconic war in the series. Then we escalate into the final saga, where post-Wano Shanks either stands as the final boss or the ultimate fallen hero. Here's the kicker. The first cut we're about to make is the most personal one. We're going back to that sunny day in Fuchsia Village, to the moment Shanks put the hat on Luffy's head. And we're asking, what if that promise was a lie? Fuchsia Village, dark version, Shanks the gardener of Joy Boy. So let's rewind, ladies and gentlemen. Before Marineford, before Gear 5, before Luffy was shaking the world. We're in a tiny bar in a nowhere village. A Yonko crew is just hanging out, drinking, laughing. It looks wholesome. It looks random. But what if it was the most calculated move Shanks ever made? You see, in the original timeline, Fuchsia Village feels like a peaceful accident. Shanks just happens to dock there, just happens to meet a loud kid with a straw hat dream, and just happens to leave behind the Gomu Gomu no Mi and a promise. But in this timeline, we flip that. A Yonko doesn't hide in East Blue for fun, and he picks the weakest sea because it's the safest place to cultivate something dangerous. Fuchsia is not random. It's Garp's home base. It's Dragon's origin. It's the cradle of the Will of D. Shanks knows this. This is the same man who can walk straight into Mary Joy's and talk to the Gorosei like it's a business meeting. He's not wandering, he's hunting. He's tracking rumors of a bloodline that keeps birthing monsters who defy the world. And here's the kicker. Shanks already knows the Gomu Gomu no Mi isn't just rubber. In this timeline, he knows it's Nika. He knows it's tied to an ancient Joy Boy figure who will shake the seas. He stole that fruit from a world government ship for a reason. He's not looking for a lucky kid. He's looking for a vessel whose soul already beats like a drum of liberation. So watch his kindness again, and the way he laughs when Luffy is weak, the way he mocks him for not being able to swim, the way he still praises Luffy's courage when that bandit threatens him. What if all of that is a test? Controlled experiments, push the kid, corner him socially, see if he backs down, or stands up even when he's helpless. When Luffy stabs his own face to prove his resolve, in the original timeline, it's just a wild moment. But in this timeline, Shanks instantly flags it. This is a child whose instinct is self-sacrifice, whose pride is tied to freedom, whose empathy kicks in even when he's terrified. That's Joy Boy material. Then we hit the Sea King scene, the legend. Shanks loses an arm to save Luffy. We always saw that as pure, selfless faith in the next generation. But what if Shanks is betting that arm on an asset? He sees the Sea King. He sees the kid sinking, and he doesn't hesitate. Not just because he cares, but because he refuses to let the vessel of Nika die before the world is ready. And that straw hat promise? Give this back to me when you've become a great pirate. In this timeline, that's a leash, a psychological anchor. Luffy's entire dream is now aimed at one man's silhouette. Every island, every fight, every power-up is Luffy unconsciously running down the path Shanks drew for him. Shanks doesn't just inspire a pirate, he gardeners a joy boy, one he plans to guide, or sacrifice, the moment it serves his true goal. So if Fuchsia was a farm, and Luffy was the chosen crop, when does the harvest begin? That's where our next branch takes us. The hat as a chain, psychological impact of a Fuchsia betrayal. So let's say the harvest doesn't happen at Marineford. It happens years later, when Luffy thinks he's finally free. In the original timeline, Shanks is the man who bet his arm on the new age, the man who trusted a crying kid in Fuchsia with a straw hat and a dream. But what if, in this timeline, Luffy discovers that was all theater? Picture this. After Wano, during that quiet lull before the final storm, Luffy is on the Sunny when a Cypher Paul dossier accidentally falls into his hands. A stolen world government report. Red-haired Shanks, frequent guest of the Gorosei, designated world balance asset. Target, the Nika fruit. You see, that one line alone would hit harder than any admiral, because it tells Luffy Shanks didn't just stumble into his life. He was sent to watch the fruit. To watch him. And then we twist the knife. Maybe Garp, tired and broken after Marineford, and finally admits it. The day Shanks walked into Fuchsia, the Marines were ordered to stand down. Not because of kindness, because of an agreement at the top of the world. Here's the kicker. That revelation doesn't just insult Luffy, it attacks the very foundation of his dream. His whole belief is that pirates can be free and kind, that the sea is a place where you choose your own family and your own path. If Shanks, the model of that ideal, turns out to be a glorified warden for the world government, then what is piracy? What is freedom? Does the Pirate King crown itself become a leash forged by people like the Gorosei? Suddenly, the hat is not just a promise, it's a chain. Every time Luffy touches it, he remembers Marineford, Shanks stopping the war, the moment that looked like salvation but might have been asset protection. And he starts questioning. Were the Yonko, the warlords, the entire balance of power just one big cage designed to keep Joy Boy dancing in the middle? So how does Luffy react? Does he become ruthless, closing himself off, turning into a more suspicious captain who doesn't rush to trust Law Kid or even former enemies like Jinbe? In this timeline, you could see him refusing alliances at the Reverie Fallout, snapping at anyone who mentions Shanks, pushing his crew harder because he refuses to ever be someone's pawn again. Or we go the other way. Luffy doubles down and says, "Then I'll show you what a real pirate is." He rejects Shanks' version of piracy entirely. He keeps the hat, not as a tribute, but as stolen property, a symbol he rips away from a false mentor and redefines on his own terms. And that bleeds straight into the crew dynamic. Does he tell them? Zoro and Robin would want the intel. Usopp, who worshipped Shanks, would be shattered, so Luffy might choose to carry it alone, acting normal on the surface while becoming quietly overprotective. He knows what it feels like to be used, so he shields his crew from every suspicious deal, every shadowy ally, even if it means turning down shortcuts to Raftel. Nami notices he laughs a little too loud. Sanji sees him take hits he doesn't need to, as if punishing himself for ever believing. Chopper watches his captain's heartbeat race whenever the hat is mentioned. And then the real question hits us, ladies and gentlemen. If the man who gave Luffy his dream was just another cog in the system, then does Luffy still want to become Pirate King? Or does he decide the only real freedom is to burn down the entire system that produced Shanks in the first place? Because if that switch flips, the final war doesn't stay a treasure hunt. It becomes a personal vendetta, and Shanks might not be the only god Luffy chooses to drag off their throne. Recruitment under a shadow, how the Straw Hats change. And that vendetta doesn't start at Marineford. It starts the moment Luffy leaves Fuchsia Village. In the original timeline, Luffy sails out with this wide-open heart, trusting anyone who feels good. In this timeline, he still laughs, still charges forward, but there's a crack in the glass. The man who gave him his dream lied. So when he hits Shellstown and meets Zoro, everything is suddenly different. Canon Zoro gets that instant. A reckless trust. Luffy just unchains him. No questions. But what if this Luffy pauses? He still saves Zoro from execution. He still decks Helmeppo. Yet you see the way his eyes narrow when Zoro says he'll become the world's greatest swordsman. You won't stab me in the back on the way, right? It sounds like a joke. It isn't. And when Zoro swears loyalty, Luffy clings to that promise like a lifeline, repeating it in his head every time he looks at the scar where Shanks' hat once pressed against his forehead. Syrup Village? That's where it gets scary. Usopp's tall tales hit different now. In the original timeline, Luffy instantly vibes with the liar. In this timeline, lies are exactly how Shanks controlled him. So Luffy calls Usopp out more sharply. She pushes him. When are you telling the truth? But once Usopp finally stands on that slope and screams that he'll protect Kaya even if he dies, Luffy's switch flips. He doesn't just accept him, he over-accepts him. Hyper-protective captain mode. Anyone who threatens Usopp isn't just an enemy, they're a second Shanks. Let's dive into Arlong Park, because this is where the betrayal burns brightest. When Nami betrays them and runs back to Arlong, in the original timeline, Luffy is confused but patient. Here, it hits every nerve. For a second, he hears Shanks' voice in hers. He walks away from her on that road, jaw clenched because he refuses to be that kid on the pier again. But when she finally breaks down and begs for help, that iconic moment with the straw hat changes. He hesitates. Fingers tighten. Symbols can be weapons, or promises can be leashes. And then he forces himself to put the hat on her head anyway, but the declaration is different. If you throw this away, I'll never forgive you. It's not just trust, it's a dare against fate. Barity turns Sanji into the final piece of this early puzzle. Sanji's dream is another all blue, another impossible sea, and Luffy sees his younger self in that stubborn devotion to Zeph. Here's the kicker. When Sanji hesitates to leave, Luffy snaps harder than in canon. If you want that dream, get on my ship now. I won't chase someone who walks away. That's not cruelty, that's fear. He can't handle another Shanks-shaped hole. Now imagine the crew learning the truth. Zoro hearing that Luffy's hero was a fraud? That's rage. As this swordsman who respects captains above all suddenly wants to cut down the Yonko, who played his own captain like a pawn. Nami, who survived Arlong's manipulation, finds out the red-haired legend did the same thing to Luffy as a child? That's another authority figure turned monster. Sanji, who worships the cooks that saved him, hears Shanks toyed with a starving kid's dream just to move a world chessboard? That's disgust on a Zeph level. So every "I will never lose a crewmate" speech? Every time Luffy screams that he'll protect them, even if he dies? In this timeline, it's louder, shakier, almost desperate. He's not just declaring loyalty, he's begging the universe not to take this family the way it twisted his first. And all of that is a ticking bomb, ladies and gentlemen, because when Marineford comes, Shanks doesn't walk in as the savior who stops the war. He walks in as the man who started Luffy's nightmare. And this time, the Straw Hats are ready to stare the architect in the eye. Rewriting Marineford. From savior to seller. So let's jump straight to the war where that nightmare detonates. Marineford. The day the world stopped to watch a family be executed on live TV. Ace is dragged to the platform. Whitebeard smashes the bay open. Luffy crashes in from the sky, already half dead from impel down. And still, he charges the execution stand like a madman. You see cannon fire, pacifistas, admirals, everything thrown at him until, finally, the cost hits. Ace dies. Whitebeard makes his final stand. And Luffy, shattered in body and soul, collapses. In the original timeline, those last moments are brutal. Luffy is unconscious, a chest ripped open by akainu, barely breathing. Jinbei tries to carry him out and gets targeted. The battlefield becomes a feeding frenzy around this one broken rookie who somehow terrified the world government just by existing. And right when Akainu's fist is about to erase Luffy completely, a blade comes down. Red-haired Shanks, the man who once bet his arm on this kid. He blocks Akainu's punch, Haki clashing with magma, and the entire war freezes. Shanks declares the fighting over. Marines, pirates, even Blackbeard hesitate. He walks over Luffy's body like a guardian deity and says, "If you want to keep fighting, you'll be fighting us." That's the authority that ended Marineford. But what if that entrance doesn't save the story? It flips it? In this timeline, everything plays out the same up to that instant. Ace is gone. Whitebeard is dead. Luffy is unconscious and bleeding out in Jinbei's arms. Akainu lunges in for the kill. Shanks appears, blade drawn, Haki roaring. Everyone expects the same rescue. Except this time, he doesn't block. He steps between them, yes. But instead of clashing, he simply stares Akainu down until the Admiral pauses. Shanks calmly takes Luffy from Jinbei's arms. No grand speech, no emotional outburst, just a Yonko lifting the future Joy Boy like cargo. Then he turns his back on the pirates. Here's the kicker. Shanks walks toward Sengoku, toward Garp, with the entire world watching through transponder snails, and says the words that rewrite history. Let's talk terms. I have Monkey D. Luffy. Instantly, Marineford stops being a rescue mission and becomes an auction block. Why is Marineford the perfect stage for this betrayal? Because everyone who matters is already here. All three admirals lined up. Fleet Admiral Sengoku and Hero of the Marines Garp, watching their grandson dangle between life and death. Blackbeard lurking with his fresh Gura Gura power, waiting to see who blinks. The Shichibukai, the Yonko's commanders, the revolutionaries' spies, and most importantly, the entire world tuned in. Any deal Shanks makes here isn't a rumor. It's a message. So what could he possibly demand that's worth handing over the man destined to become Joy Boy? A blank check on the new world? Access to Mary Joaz's forbidden knowledge? Immunity for his crew in exchange for delivering Nika back into chains? Let's dive into that terrifying question next. Because this trade doesn't just change Marineford's ending, it changes the balance of the entire world. Watch the deal with Sengoku, Shanks' secret agenda at Marineford. So here's where this timeline gets really scary. Because that mysterious scene in Mary Joaz, where Shanks casually walks in to talk with the Gorosei? In the original timeline, it was already suspicious. But what if that wasn't a one-off favor? It was the setup for this exact moment at Marineford. You see, those quiet meetings in the Holy Land become the real prologue. Behind those closed doors, Shanks lays out a contingency. If Joy Boy appears too early, if the Nika fruit awakens before the world is ready, he'll be the one to deliver that threat. Not a CP unit, not a Marine Admiral, a Yonko acting as the world government's unofficial executioner of destiny. So when Gear 5 Luffy suddenly drums to life on the battlefield, was when the sky splits and the sea itself feels like it's laughing, the Gorosei's secret deal kicks in instantly. In this timeline, Shanks doesn't just arrive to stop the war. He arrives to cash in on a promise made in that pristine white room under the giant world map. Let's dive into the bargain. Shanks steps between Luffy and the admirals, not as a savior, but as a broker. He offers them something unthinkable. Luffy's body, the living embodiment of Nika, in exchange for three things: protection for all Red Hair territories, classified information on the Void Century, and a guarantee that the status of the One Piece will not be altered without his knowledge. He wants his island safe, his crew untouchable, and the truth of the world laid bare at his feet. Here's the kicker. He doesn't just hand Luffy over. He demands the right to personally oversee Luffy's containment. Shanks frames it as responsibility. He tells Sengoku and the Den Mushi-connected Gorosei that no marine prison can hold Joy Boy, that only someone with his haki and his history with Luffy can keep this god of freedom from plunging the world into instant chaos. He paints himself as the Warden of the Sun, the one man standing between order and annihilation. How does everyone react to that? Sengoku is torn to pieces. The prophecy Whitebeard shouted still echoes in his head, and the sight of a cartoon-like god rampaging through Marineford proves it. Joy Boy is real, but can he really trust a Yonko to deliver that god in chains? He hesitates, watching Shanks like a bomb that might go off at any second. Garp, though, is frozen. On his fists that once shattered mountains just hang there, as he realizes his grandson isn't being rescued. He's being traded. Every choice he made, to stay a Marine, to let Ace be executed, to not move when Luffy charged the platform, crashes down on him in one instant. The admirals start calculating. Do they strike now and risk provoking Shanks, or let him walk out with the most dangerous fruit in history? Kizaru's finger glows, Akainu grinds his teeth, Aokiji's breath fogs in the air as they all weigh the same question. Is this deal better than all-out war with a Yonko plus Joy Boy? And the battlefield? It explodes in confusion. Pirates scream betrayal, some firing at Shanks, others too stunned to move. Marines don't know whether to cheer the end of Nika or aim their guns at the red-haired ally, cutting his own terms. Why, up on the edges of the chaos, Blackbeard watches with that twisted grin, realizing the game is even bigger than he thought. If Shanks is willing to sell Joy Boy, what else is he playing for? And how can Teach steal it all out from under him next? War resimulated. Marineford. Under a red betrayal Shanks standing over Luffy isn't the end of Marineford. It's the reset button. The war doesn't stop. It mutates. Because the second everyone realizes the red-haired savior is actually the one delivering Joy Boy, every final move on this battlefield gets rewritten. Let's dive into Whitebeard first. In the original timeline, his last stand is all about Ace and the one who will carry on Roger's will. But in this timeline, as his heart fails and his senses sharpen, that monstrous observation haki brushes against Shanks' intent. He doesn't feel protection. He feels negotiation. So what does the old man do? Does he roar at his sons to grab Luffy at all costs, even if Ace is lost again? Or does he gamble everything on Ace escaping, knowing Luffy in Shanks' hands is a ticking time bomb tied to the Void Century? You see, Whitebeard's final quake might not be aimed at Marines at all. He could slam the ground to split the field, carving a chasm between Shanks and the execution platform, forcing a path either for Ace to flee or for a rescue squad to dive straight at Luffy's limp body. His last order changes from retreat to take back the future. And then there's Garp. In the original timeline, Sengoku pins him down, the old hero torn but restrained. Here, Shanks hoisting Luffy like a bargaining chip snaps something even Sengoku can't hold. Garp doesn't just step forward, he rockets, fist cocked. No speeches, just pure, blind rage aimed straight at Shanks' face. Pattern interrupt. For the first time, the Marines' living legend is attacking their supposed ally, not a pirate enemy. Instantly, the admirals are forced into a nightmare decision. Do they block Garp to protect their Yonko negotiator, or attack Shanks to secure Luffy themselves? You can almost see Kizaru's lazy eyes sharpen as he flashes between them, beams colliding with Redhair's blade while Akainu snarls that they should just kill everyone and drag Nika's corpse to Mary Joyce. Meanwhile, the Whitebeard commanders are watching their little brother's body in enemy hands. Marco doesn't hesitate. In this timeline, he rallies Jozu and the remaining division leaders for one last suicidal charge. Not to save Ace this time, but to rip Luffy out of Shanks' grip. Phoenix flames clash with Beckman's bullets. Jozu's diamond shoulder meets Rue's brute force. It's red-haired pirates versus Whitebeard's remnants in the middle of Marineford, while Marines form a desperate perimeter around Sengoku. Here's the kicker. Blackbeard loves this. In the original timeline, he shows off his new darkness and quake powers and bales. But what if this chaos hands him something even better? Teach can aim for 3 wins at once. He can try to snatch Luffy in the confusion. He can use the shattered command structures to assassinate key commanders. Or he can simply let Shanks and the Marines bleed each other dry while he secures more territories and level 6 monsters. Visually, this Marineford is insane. Luffy's limp body is caught in a triangle of monsters. Shanks on one side, Sengoku in Buddha form on the other, and Garp or Marco crashing in from the third angle. Conqueror's haki crackles like red and gold lightning, splitting the sky, knocking out fodder by the thousands. Den Den Mushi across the world broadcast one image, the symbol of the new age, Joy Boy himself, dangling between a Yonko and the fleet admiral as a bargaining chip in an ancient, secret war. And as the dust swirls, everyone watching, Dragon, the Gorosei, even Kaido out in the New World, realizes the same terrifying thing. Marineford didn't end the age of pirates. In this timeline, Shanks just hijacked it. So what happens when the man who bet his arm on the new age now holds that new age by the throat? Garp's breaking point. Would he finally turn on the Marines? And right there, with Shanks holding Luffy's fate like a bargaining chip, there's one man on that platform who cannot breathe this in silence. Monkey D. Garp. Let's dive into Garp. Because if Shanks betrays Luffy at Marineford, this isn't just a twist in the story. This is an earthquake in his soul. In the original timeline, Garp was already at his breaking point. He watched Ace walk to the scaffold. He heard Sengoku announce the sins of the Pirate King's bloodline. He sat there, fists clenched, while the Marines he built his legend with executed his grandson. And remember, this is the same Garp who refused the title of Admiral so he wouldn't be chained to the Celestial Dragon's cruelty. You see, Garp has always been that quiet resistor. He trains Luffy and Ace to be monsters, then sends them into the pirate world. He laughs off promotions. He punches Celestial Dragon's dogs when no one's looking. His whole life is a tug-of-war between the uniform on his back and the family in his heart. But what if Shanks betrays Luffy right in front of him? That's different. Ace's death was the system killing his family. This is an ally weaponizing his grandson. This is the man who once walked into Fuchsia Village with a smile, who bet his arm on the new age, now using that same new age as a bargaining chip with the world government. That's not just tragedy for Garp, that's humiliation. So what happens when that humiliation snaps? In this timeline, we branch. First route, Garp's rage goes straight at Shanks. He doesn't argue, he doesn't warn, he just moves. One instant Shanks is negotiating. The next, the hero of the Marines is in his face, fist coated in haki, roaring that no pirate touches his grandson. Suddenly, everyone freezes. Do the admirals restrain Garp? Do the vice admirals back their hero or their orders? Second route, Garp doesn't swing at Shanks at all. He turns on the institution. He grabs Sengoku by the coat, drags him forward, and screams across the battlefield that the Marines, the Gorosei, the whole world government have lost their way. He calls out Akainu's justice, the Celestial Dragon's cruelty, the secret meetings with Shanks. Here's the kicker. Coming from anyone else, it's treason. Coming from Garp, it's a signal. Instantly, Marineford fractures. Some Marines lower their rifles, tears in their eyes, remembering the man who trained them. Others double down, aiming at their own comrades. Aokiji hesitates. Kobe shakes. Smoker grits his teeth. You can feel a Marine civil war about to erupt in real time. And we end on that image. Garp standing between Shanks and Sengoku, fists clenched, veins bulging, as the entire world realizes the hero of the Marines might be about to punch his own institution in the face. So if Garp falls here, who dares stand on the justice side next? Whitebeard's last order, save Ace or save Joy Boy? And while the cameras lock onto Garp, there's one man the transponder snails keep cutting back to. Whitebeard. You see, in the original timeline, his final speech to Sengoku is almost prophetic. He roars that Roger's treasure is real, that someday a man will appear who will challenge the world, and that when he finds the One Piece, a war will engulf everything. That's not just old man rambling. That's a Yonko talking about Joy Boy level stakes. But what if, in this timeline, that man isn't vague anymore? Whitebeard has watched Luffy crash Marineford like a storm, shatter Ace's fatalism, and even make hardened pirates move on instinct to protect him. He's seen the way Ace smiles differently when Luffy's name is shouted. He's seen the way the battlefield itself bends around this kid. And now he sees something else. Shanks. Not as a savior ending the war, but as the man holding Luffy's limp body like a bargaining chip, standing in front of Sengoku. Instantly, everything Whitebeard suspected about the Will of D and the New Age snaps into focus. If Roger was waiting for Joy Boy, then Shanks is trying to trade Joy Boy. So here's the kicker. When Whitebeard feels his heart failing and his body cracking, his final decision tree completely changes. In the original timeline, he spends his last strength tearing Marineford apart to give Ace and his sons a path to escape. In this timeline, he stares down two futures. Does he use his last quake to blow open a route for Ace? Or does he drive his power straight into the ground between Shanks and the Marines to rip Luffy out of everyone's hands? It's the most brutal dilemma this old man has ever faced. Save the son he claimed, or save the future of the world. Whitebeard chooses a third option. Let's dive into the tragic compromise. He plants his Bacento. The air itself screams. With one final Gura Gura no Mi shock, he tilts the entire battlefield. One wave of destruction erupts behind Ace, hurling him and the Whitebeard remnants away from the plaza, forcing them onto an escape path whether they want it or not. At the same time, a second fracture spears forward. We're ripping through the ground under Shanks' feet, shattering the footing between the red-haired pirates and the execution platform. Shanks is forced to leap back or be swallowed. Luffy's body is blasted from his grasp, skidding across broken stone toward the chaos of the pirates instead of the order of the Marines. Whitebeard doesn't even try to save himself. He knows he dies here, but he's betting everything on the Will of D, on the idea that Joy Boy cannot be caged forever, no matter how tightly Shanks or the world government try to chain him. He leaves Ace alive, Luffy unclaimed, and a message carved into the world. The next generation must decide what to do with this free Joy Boy. So when the dust clears and Luffy's body lies between two armies, the real question becomes, who reaches him first? Laura turned inside out. Shanks, Joy Boy, and the Gorosei. And that's where Shanks steps out of legend and into something way darker. Because when we ask, who reaches Luffy first, we're not just talking about bodies on a battlefield. We're talking about ideology, about who gets to define what Joy Boy actually is. In the original timeline, Shanks is the savior of Marineford. He walks in, stops the war, carries Luffy's broken body away, and everyone just accepts that the red-haired Yonko is the responsible adult in the room. But what if that image is exactly what the world government needs him to be? You see, there's one scene that completely flips how we read his character. Shanks walking into Mary Joaz and sitting down with the Gorosei like it's a casual business meeting. Why is a Yonko allowed to do that? Why does the most paranoid regime in the world let a supposed enemy have direct access to the five guys who run everything? That doesn't sound like simple respect. That sounds like trust or leverage. Let's dive into the connection the story keeps hinting at. Because Shanks isn't just some random pirate with a cool hat. He's the man who stole the Gomu Gomu no Mi. Here's the kicker. Now that we know it's actually the Nika fruit, that theft looks way too clean to be coincidence. A top-secret world government transport, a mythical Zoan that terrifies the Gorosei, and Shanks just happens to intercept that exact ship? In this timeline, we treat it like what it really is, a surgical operation. Either Shanks was working off intel from Mary Joaz, or he was already in a long, twisted negotiation with them. So why steal it? I had two terrifying options. One, to keep Nika out of the government's hands. Two, to choose the wielder himself. And that's where Luffy stops being just a kid from Fuchsia Village and becomes a deliberate gamble. Shanks watches this reckless boy talk about being Pirate King, laughs, and in this timeline you realize he isn't just amused, he's evaluating. Is this the Joy Boy I can manage? Because Shanks, in this version of the story, doesn't see himself as a villain. He sees himself as a guardian of balance. He knows the Void Century ended in catastrophe. He knows an unchecked Joy Boy can literally reshape the world. So he comes to one brutal conclusion. Joy Boy must be controlled, delayed, or, if necessary, sacrificed. Not out of greed, but out of fear of another world-ending liberation. And suddenly, well, his relationship with the Gorosei makes sense. They want Nika erased. He wants Nika leashed. Different methods, same terror. That's why they tolerate him. That's why a Yonko can walk into their chamber and talk about a certain pirate like a co-manager of fate. So when Shanks reaches Luffy's body first at Marineford in this timeline, the betrayal isn't him turning evil on a dime. It's the moment his utilitarian logic wins. He looks at this free, laughing Joy Boy and decides the world cannot survive the version of Luffy who answers to no one. The question is, does he hand Luffy over or personally put a sword to his throat? Cut to Wano. What if Shanks arrived as an executioner? In this timeline, we jump past Marineford's decision and land in the aftermath of Wano, where the bill for that choice finally comes due. And Luffy has just beaten Kaido. The drums of liberation shook the entire world. The boy Shanks once bet his arm on is now officially an emperor. In the original timeline, Shanks sees that newspaper, smiles, and talks about finally meeting Luffy. Pride, nostalgia, a toast to the new era. But what if that smile never happens? What if that same headline hits the Red Force's deck and Shanks goes dead silent? Because to him, Gear 5 isn't a miracle. It's the alarm clock of the apocalypse. You see, Shanks is one of the only pirates who can walk into Mary Joy's and chat with the Gorosei face to face. He knows about the Gomu Gomu no Mi, about Nika, about Joy Boy being the man who will change everything. In this timeline, when he feels that ridiculous cartoonish freedom radiating off Luffy from across the sea, he doesn't think my little brother made it. He thinks the deadline just arrived. Here's the kicker. Instead of racing to meet Luffy as an equal, he races to intercept him as an executioner. The Red Force appears near Wano's shores, just like in canon. Same iconic silhouette cutting through the mist, same epic track you hear in your head. But the aura? Completely changed. No sake barrels, no laughing Usopp, no Usopp hype moment. The crew stands in absolute silence. Weapons ready, eyes hard. Shanks steps off the ship with Griffin already drawn. No cloak fluttering in the breeze while he jokes with the locals. He walks like a man heading to an execution platform at Marineford. Only this time, Luffy is the condemned. Everyone on Wano can feel it instantly. The sky tightens, the air crackles. Even after fighting Kaido, as the samurai's hands start shaking. Luffy, still riding the high of victory, bounces over in Gear 5, drums thundering, body-bending reality like a Saturday morning cartoon. He's laughing, because how could he not? This is Shanks, the man who saved him, the man who inspired him, the man who put the hat on his head and said, "Return it when you're a great pirate." But Shanks doesn't reach for the hat. He raises his blade. He tells Luffy in front of everyone that Joy Boy cannot be allowed to reach Laugh-Tale, that the old order, as rotten as it is the only thing stopping the world from collapsing into chaos, that he stole Nika's fruit to control its rebirth, and that Luffy broke that control at Marineford. No toast, no congratulations. Just a sentence. And then it hits. Shanks unleashes his full Conqueror's haki, not as a friendly clash, but as pure killing intent. The sky splits, clouds spiral, Wano's strongest warriors drop to their knees. Luffy, still grinning in that carefree Nika form, stares at the man he idolized as that pressure crashes down on him, realizing this isn't a reunion, it's an execution. So what happens when Joy Boy's freedom collides head-on with Shanks' iron logic? That's where this betrayal goes from personal to world-ending. Joy Boy versus Red Hair, Battle of Legends in Wano's aftermath. Wano's skies don't just split, they scream. Black and white lightning collide as Shanks' Conqueror's haki slams into Luffy's full Gear 5 aura. On one side, that refined, razor-sharp pressure we've only ever seen hinted at. On the other, the wild, drumming joy of Nika, laughing as reality bends. In the original timeline, Shanks stopped a war. In this timeline, he starts one in the ashes of Wano. The air ripples. Clouds spiral into a vortex over Onagashima's ruins. Samurai who survived Kaido instantly drop, foaming at the mouth. You see trees splinter just from the aftershocks as Luffy's rubbery giant fist collides with Shanks' simple, haki-coated blade, and the island itself groans. At first, the Straw Hats cheer. Of course they do. Luffy's finally meeting Shanks! Usopp's eyes shine, chopper waves. Even Brook plays a quick riff. But what if that excitement only lasts 3 seconds? Because instantly, everything feels wrong. Shanks doesn't smile, he doesn't drink, he doesn't even talk. He just presses forward, Conqueror's coating wrapping his sword in pure killing intent. Zoro's hand goes to his hilts, Sanji's cigarette falls from his mouth. Yojinbe's instincts, honed as a former warlord, scream one thing. This isn't a friendly clash. This is an execution carried through. When Shanks angles his blade not to clash, but to sever Luffy's arm at the shoulder, everyone gets it. This man is aiming to disable Joy Boy. Oi! Are we really watching Luffy get killed by his hero? Sanji snaps. Zoro's eye narrows. Jinbei quietly steps forward, water vapor swirling around his fists. They're seconds away from jumping in on a childhood legend. But Ben Beckman is already there, gun raised, eyes cold. No jokes, no lazy posture. No further, he says, and the red-haired pirates fan out with military precision. Usopp's rifle is trained on Usopp's heart. Lucky Roo blocks Sanji like a moving wall. Every officer radiates that same terrifying resolve. Like they've always known what Shanks was really here to do. Here's the kicker. These guys weren't just partying for years. They were guarding the world's deadliest contingency plan. Shanks stole Nika from the government, raised it in East Blue, and his crew has been prepared from Marineford onward to make sure Joy Boy doesn't go out of control. Mid-air, between strikes, the realization finally hits Luffy. Shanks isn't here to sail with him to Laugh Tale. He's here to stand as the final wall, the last gate before the true One Piece and the Void Century. That straw hat, the promise, the tears in Fuchsia, all pieces on a board Luffy never saw. His laughter stutters. Shanks, were you lying from the start? Luffy asks, still stretching, still bouncing, but with something cracked behind the grin. Shanks' answer is brutal. I bet my arm on the new age. I never said I'd let it run wild. Then he moves. A single step. The ground caves. His blade, drenched in conquerors and armament, slips past Luffy's defense and slams into his chest with a shockwave that shatters distant mountains. Gear 5's rubber body dents, bones creak, and for the first time since Marineford, that carefree Nika smile actually breaks. And as Luffy coughs blood, eyes wide, you have to ask, did we just find the one enemy Joy Boy can't laugh off? Because this battle isn't over. It's only getting serious. Pattern break. What if Shanks is the good traitor? Luffy's smile cracks. Blood hits the ground. And that's when this timeline does something way darker than a simple good versus evil fight. What if Shanks isn't trying to destroy Joy Boy, but finish forging him? You see, like in the original timeline, Shanks is framed as the ultimate mentor figure, the guy who saves Luffy at Fuchsia, who stops Marineford, who bets his arm on the new age. But what if all of that was just the setup for the most brutal, tough love in One Piece history? Let's dive into the idea that this betrayal isn't malicious at all. It's strategic. Shanks knows Luffy's greatest strength is that limitless, almost stupid optimism. So he targets it. He breaks it. Because he believes that only by shattering Luffy's heart and body can he trigger the final evolution of Nika. We've seen this pattern before. Garp throwing Kid Luffy and Ace into the wilderness with bandits who literally didn't care if they lived. Rayleigh on Rusukaina, leaving Luffy alone with monsters until he either learned Haki or died. Even back in Fuchsia. And Shanks lets Higuma humiliate him in front of everyone, refusing to fight back, forcing Luffy to understand what real pirates and real danger look like. None of that was gentle. But it worked. Now scale that philosophy up to a global level. In this timeline, Shanks has been playing a game way above Yonko politics. He walks into Mary Joyce. He talks to the Gorosei. He steals the Gomu Gomu no Mi from a government ship. That's not random flexing. That's someone who knows exactly what Nika is, what Joy Boy represents, and what happens if that power reaches Laugh Tale at the wrong time. Here's the kicker. What if there's a hidden failsafe? A secret Emu command? Or an ancient weapon protocol that activates if Joy Boy reaches the final island out of sequence? An automatic purge of the seas. Uranus unleashed on every major island. There's the great cleansing we keep hearing whispers about, but on an even worse scale. If Shanks knows that, then suddenly aligning with the Gorosei in public stops looking like a heel turn and starts looking like controlled opposition. By standing with them against Luffy, he gets access to their plans, their weapons, their timing. Luffy's apparent defeat becomes cover. The world thinks Joy Boy has been stopped, so the failsafe doesn't trigger. Yet. So Shanks swings that blade with full killing intent. He crushes Luffy's trust. He might even hand Luffy's broken body over in a staged capture after this fight, just like a twisted reverse Marineford, all to get closer to Imu and the ancient weapons. But what if that's the only way to save everyone? If Shanks chooses to be the villain in Luffy's story, to be hated by the very kid he bet his arm on, just to stop a catastrophe none of us have seen yet. Is he really the traitor? Or is he the only one willing to burn his own legend to keep the world alive. And when Luffy learns that truth, does he forgive him or punch him anyway? Straw Hat Fallout. Can Luffy trust anyone after Shanks? So here's where it really hurts, ladies and gentlemen. If Shanks is the villain in Luffy's story, then the first thing that dies isn't a Yonko, it's Luffy's idea of trust. You see, in the original timeline, Luffy's faith in people is insane. He hands Nami the hat at Arlong Park, the one treasure he'd never let touch the ground, and just believes she'll come back. He lets Robin walk away at Eni's lobby, then risks everything because he knows she wants to live. At Whole Cake, when Sanji kicks him, he starves him and abandons the crew. Luffy still sits in that forest and waits. No doubts, no conditions. That absolute trust didn't appear out of nowhere. It was modeled on one man, Shanks, the first good pirate who laughed off insults, bet his arm on the future, and made sacrifice look safe. But what if that model shatters? If Shanks sells Luffy out at Marineford or turns on him post-Wano, suddenly every past decision looks different. Does Luffy still charge into Dressrosa because Law says ally? Does he welcome Yamato as Kozuki Oden on the spot? Does he treat Vivi, Rebecca, and Shirahoshi as instant friends, or as potential traps planted by a world that's been lying to him since Fuchsia Village? In this timeline, every new handshake has a shadow behind it. Here's the kicker. Luffy's reaction could split two ways. Either he becomes more cautious with outsiders like Law and Bonnie, testing them, pushing them, watching how they act when the chips are down, or he overcorrects and locks even harder onto the Straw Hats. Trust fewer people, but trust them to the absolute limit. He stops asking every random weirdo, "What's your dream?" He doesn't casually invite a skeleton musician or a talking reindeer onto the ship. He just observes, quietly, waiting for the mask to slip. Imagine Luffy, the guy who once yelled, "You're my Nakama now!" at first meeting, turning instead into the captain who listens more than he laughs, scanning for that Shanks-shaped knife in the back. And how does the crew handle that? Nami and Robin know betrayal trauma. Nami was owned by Arlong. Robin was hunted by the entire world. In this timeline, they're the ones who get it instantly when Luffy flinches at the word promise. They build new rules, new boundaries, so he can still lead without bleeding out emotionally. Zoro, on the other hand, doesn't care if Shanks is a hero, a traitor, or a celestial dragon in cosplay. He'll just say, "I don't follow Shanks, I follow you. Don't mix that up." Usopp takes it the hardest. His childhood idol was Shanks too. Now he has to compare his own cowardice and lies to Shanks' deception and ask, am I any different? That question either breaks him or forges the bravest sniper in any timeline. And all of this comes back to the hat. In the original timeline, it's a promise to Shanks. In this timeline, does Luffy keep wearing it as his own symbol, stripping Shanks out of it completely? Or is there a day, right before the final war, where he sets that hat down on the deck, looks at his Jolly Roger, and says, "This era isn't yours anymore, it's mine." When he does that, is he breaking a promise, or finally making one that belongs to him alone? Because once Luffy rewrites what that hat means, the entire world has to rewrite what Pirate King means too. Reverie and the Red Shadow, political shockwaves of a Shanks betrayal. And the second that meaning changes, the world doesn't just watch, it reacts, violently. Because whether that betrayal happens at Marineford with Luffy unconscious in Shanks' hands, or later at Wano with Gear 5 blazing, the first thing that changes is the broadcast. You see, this isn't a quiet back alley deal. Transponder snails are already rolling. Den feeds from Marineford, from Onigashima, from Navy HQ. The whole world is tuned in when the red-haired Yonko turns his blade, or his back, on Joy Boy. In the original timeline, Shanks walked in as the man who stopped the war. In this timeline, Morgans wakes up foaming at the mouth from hype. Red-haired hero subdues Joy Boy, or traitor emperor sells out new era. Which headline does he print? That's the fun part. He prints both in different regions. To the nobles, Shanks is the responsible Yonko who helped contain the Nika threat. To the pirates and common folk, he's the monster who shackled the sun itself. And the Marines? They weaponize this instantly. Sengoku, if he's still Fleet Admiral in your version of the timeline, holds a press conference with that calm, heavy voice. Even an Emperor of the Sea recognizes the danger of this so-called Joy Boy. Akainu, once he's in charge, doesn't even bother with calm. He points at the cameras and roars that if a Yonko had to betray Luffy to keep the world from burning, then every pirate, from East Blue rookies to New World legends, needs to be crushed before the next Nika appears. But what if the other emperors are watching that same feed? Blackbeard is laughing so hard the ship shakes. He calls Shanks a coward, a dog of the celestial dragons, a man who knelt to the very people he used to threaten, all while secretly thinking, if Shanks can hand over Joy Boy, I can steal Joy Boy. Big Mom is furious that anyone interfered with the soul of the Nika fruit's destiny. That was supposed to be her family's era, her dream cake of history. And Kaido, if he's still alive in that branch, doesn't care who betrayed who. He only cares that Joy Boy exists. Yeah, he becomes obsessed with dragging Luffy back out of government hands just to fight him again, even if that means tearing down Mary Joy's itself. Here's the kicker. The Revolutionary Army is watching too. Dragon learns that the man who inspired his son, the Yonko who could walk into Mary Joy's and chat with the Gorosei, is now visibly aligned with them. That's not just betrayal, that's a strategic nightmare. Does Dragon wait for the right time anymore? Or does he order Sabo and the commanders to accelerate everything? Reverie raids, weapon sabotage, even open strikes on Holy Land routes, before Shanks' faction and the world government fully merge? Because from this point on, it's not four emperors balancing each other, it's a triangle of power. On one side, world government forces, now bolstered by Shanks' influence, intel, and hockey monsters. On another, Blackbeard's Chaos Empire, hunting Nika and the One Piece for himself. On the third, a wounded but rising Joy Boy alliance. Straw Hats, remnants of Whitebeard, Wano, Fishman Island, maybe even Dragon if their interests finally align. So when the next reverie convenes under this red shadow, what happens when the kings of the world realize that one Yonko is sitting at the table in spirit already, and the other is coming to flip it over? Egghead rewritten, Shanks, Vegapunk, and the truth about Nika. Because while the kings are arguing over empty chairs at the reverie, the real throne is being contested on Egghead. In the original timeline, Egghead is where Vegapunk's research on the Void Century, Nika, and the Ancient Kingdom finally pushes the world government into full panic mode. CP0, Kizaru, Saturn. Buster Call energy everywhere. But what if, in this timeline, the biggest threat to that secret isn't Saturn, it's Shanks? Let's dive into Egghead Rewritten as the moment the mask finally cracks. Luffy and the crew crash into Egghead like normal. Punk records, the satellites, the holograms, all of that stays. Vegapunk still pulls Luffy aside, still whispers about Nika, about a warrior of liberation, whose heartbeat drums through history. You see, the setup is the same, until Vegapunk accesses one locked archive he never opened in the original story. On a massive holographic screen, he doesn't just show Joy Boy's silhouette or ancient ships. He pulls up memory recordings from stolen Ohara data, God Valley fragments, even classified marine logs. And there, in scene after scene, is the same red silhouette. A young cabin boy on Roger's ship at Laughtail, a shadowed figure at God Valley standing behind Garp and Roger, a hooded man entering Mary Joy's to speak with the Gorosei long before he was a Yonko. Red hair, the same presence, Shanks. Here's the kicker. Vegapunk reveals that this man appears in records spanning decades with almost no aging. A recurring guardian of balance, who always shows up where the world's fate pivots. Roger's execution, the Rock's downfall, the Ohara incident, seen from orbiting surveillance snails. Why is the same man always there when history is about to be erased? Then Vegapunk zooms in on the Gomu Gomu no Mi incident. In the original timeline, we're told Shanks' crew just stole a random devil fruit from a government ship, and Luffy suddenly eats it. But in this timeline, and Egghead's data shows the route of that convoy, the exact cipher on its cargo list, and the Gorosei's private memo labeling it not Gomu Gomu, but Hito Hito no Mi, Model Nika. The ship's path was changed last minute. The only ones who could know? The Gorosei, and anyone they secretly trusted. So why were the red-haired pirates waiting at the perfect ambush point? While everyone is still processing, alarms scream. A third force has breached Egghead's perimeter. Not just Marines, not just CP0, the Red Force. Shanks walks onto Egghead not as Luffy's savior, but as the cleanup crew. His haki alone freezes lesser Marines, but his eyes never leave Vegapunk. In front of Luffy, in front of the Straw Hats, he tells Saturn and Kizaru they're late. Vegapunk's most dangerous research can't reach Joy Boy's ears. On pattern interrupt, Shanks and Saturn stand side by side for one terrifying instant, united in purpose. Egghead turns into a three-way standoff. Marines trying to erase history, Shanks trying to control it, and Luffy, Nika awakened, watching holograms of his childhood hero handing over reports to the very elders who ordered Ohara's destruction. What do you even do when the man who bet his arm on your future was betting on your fruit, not your freedom? Vegapunk, desperate, projects one last file. Ancient blueprints linking a red-haired guardian to an arbiter of dawn, someone meant to choose whether Joy Boy rises or is chained forever. Is Shanks that arbiter? Or the final jailer? And when Luffy's heartbeat starts to change again on Egghead, who moves first? The Gorosei Saturn? Or Shanks? As because the next clash won't just decide Egghead, it decides whether Nika is truly free or leashed by the man who raised his flag in Fuchsia Village. Micro-betrayals, rereading every Shanks cameo. So if Shanks is the arbiter or the jailer, we have to go back. Because the betrayal doesn't start at Egghead. It starts the moment a rubber-brained kid from Fuchsia Village gets noticed by the world. In the original timeline, when Shanks sees Luffy's very first bounty poster, he bursts out laughing. Pure pride! The kid did it. But what if that same scene in this timeline is something else entirely? Picture Shanks in some New World bar, the poster sliding across the table. He lifts it up, that familiar grin on his face. Yet his eyes don't scream nostalgia. They scream calculation. Confirmation. Joy Boy is on schedule, and the bet on the new age is paying off right on time. You see, that tiny moment becomes a status report. Luffy's strong enough to be noticed, but still weak enough to be guided, still moldable, still an asset. Now jump to Marineford's lead-up. Kaido moves to crash the war. In the original timeline, Shanks intercepts him, and we all go, wow, Yonko balance, hype, red-haired peacemaker. But in this timeline, that clash is way more sinister. What if Shanks isn't saving Whitebeard or the Marines? He's saving his investment? If Kaido reaches Marineford at full rage while Luffy is barely holding on to consciousness, Joy Boy dies on the wrong battlefield, before the Gorosei are ready, before the deal is sealed. So Shanks throws himself in Kaido's path, not as a hero, but as a project manager protecting his most valuable piece. And then there's the big emotional knife. Shanks refusing to meet Luffy, over and over. We'll meet when you've become a great pirate. Sounds romantic, right? But what if that line is a shield? The further Luffy rises, the more dangerous it is for Shanks to look him in the eyes. Because sentiment is the one thing that can ruin a long con. If he watches Luffy grow, if he sails alongside him, that father-figure bond hardens, and betrayal becomes impossible. So distance isn't just mystique, it's emotional insulation. Let's dive into the crew, because they're not innocent bystanders either. Ben Beckman, the man who can make Kizaru raise his hands, is always there at Shanks' elbow. In the original timeline, he's the calm strategist. But what if he's also the handler? Well, the one who reminds Shanks of the mission when the captain's resolve wavers? Every time Shanks gets that soft look talking about Luffy, Ben's the one lighting his cigarette, changing the subject, steering him back toward the plan about Joy Boy they've carried since God Valley. Here's the kicker. Once you put on the betrayal lens, every single time Shanks protects Luffy suddenly feels different, saving him from the Sea King, blocking Akainu's fist, ending Marineford before Kizaru can finish the job. In this timeline, he isn't preserving Luffy's dream. He's preserving the conditions of his own endgame. So when Shanks smiles kindly at that bounty poster, are we seeing a proud mentor or a man checking off a box on a very dark checklist? And if every act of kindness was really set up, what happens the first time Luffy realizes it? As because the moment that illusion shatters might be the real start of the final war. Battle Resim. Shanks versus Admirals, this time for real. And this is where that illusion shatters in the loudest way possible. Marineford is still burning. The air is still shaking. But this time, Shanks doesn't walk in to end the war. He walks in to cash in on Joy Boy. Akainu is dragging himself out of the rubble, half his face melted, coat in tatters. But his justice is louder than his pain. In the original timeline, he was forced to stop. In this timeline, the moment he sees Luffy's unconscious body behind Shanks, he roars one thing. As long as that boy breathes, this war isn't over. He launches forward. A magma hound the size of a battleship tears across the plaza, boiling the very air. Instantly, Shanks is there, Griffin out, and black and red lightning exploding as he slams straight into Sakazuki's fist. The sky doesn't just split once, it rips again and again, like the world itself is flinching. You see, we've never really seen Shanks go all out. But what if Marineford was the first time he showed everyone what a true emperor looks like? Every swing is coded in advanced conquerors, his blade never actually touching the magma, his will repelling it, redirecting it, turning those lethal punches into molten shockwaves that blast craters into Marine HQ. While those two monsters collide head-on, the real game starts on the edges. Kizaru turns into light, that lazy face suddenly razor-sharp. If we can't kill Joy Boy directly, we can at least remove the piece. He appears high above, fingers forming a Yasakani no Magatama aimed straight at Luffy's chest. But before those beams fire, a gun cocks. Ben Beckman is already there on a shattered mast, rifle leveled, hockey pressure so dense even photons hesitate. In the original timeline, that stare alone made Kizaru stall. Let's dive into what happens when he's actually serious. Light bullets meet hockey bullets midair, detonating in blinding mid-sky explosions. Beckman isn't just threatening, he's hurting Kizaru's aim away from Luffy, forcing the Admiral to waste shots, to reposition, to realize the red-haired pirates aren't background characters. They're an Emperor's shield wall around their captain's new bargaining chip. On the other flank, Aokiji slides in over a frozen tide, hand outstretched, trying to quietly lock Luffy in ice. Lucky Roo and Usopp cut him off, one shattering ice with brute force, and the other sniping Kuzan's arm the instant it reaches for Luffy. Every crewmate moves with one goal: keep Shanks' prize intact. Here's the kicker. Shanks isn't just trading blows, he's moving the entire duel, step by step, toward the broadcast transponders. Every sky-splitting clash, every burst of conquerors, happens in full view of the cameras. He's crafting an image for the world, the man who holds Joy Boy's life in his hands, the only Emperor standing between the Marines and a second God Valley. Akainu realizes it too late. One final clash. Griffin crashes down, magma surges up. When the dust clears, we get a frozen tableau. Shanks' sword at Akainu's throat. Akainu's magma fist pressed against Shanks' chest, sizzling cloth. And between their legs, inches away from both, Luffy's limp body, steam faintly rising. Every Den Mushi zooms in. Every pirate, every marine, every civilian watching around the world holds their breath. Who breaks this deadlock first? The fleet admiral of absolute justice, or the emperor who just put a blade to the world government's neck? Because the next move Shanks makes here doesn't just decide Marineford, it decides who owns Joy Boy. Character rewrites: Sengoku, Akainu, and the fear of Joy Boy. Sengoku is the first to move, but not with a punch, with a question. Because when Shanks offers a living Joy Boy instead of a corpse on the scaffold, the entire battlefield flips from war to negotiation. You see, Sengoku isn't just a retired fleet admiral. He's one of the very few who heard Whitebeard's prophecy and actually connected it to the Void Century whispers buried in classified records. In the original timeline, he lets Shanks end Marineford because it preserves balance. But in this timeline, he's staring at the embodiment of that prophecy bleeding in the sand, and at the Yonko who stole Nika from a government ship and walked into Mary Juaize to talk with the Gorosei. So, what does a man like Sengoku do when the trigger of the world is unconscious at his feet, and the man holding the trigger is smiling? He stalls. He weighs risk versus disaster. Execute Luffy here and now, and you might create a martyr Joy Boy whose legend ignites every sea. Hand him to Shanks under controlled supervision, and you keep Joy Boy off the public stage, while tying a leash, however thin, to a Yonko who's already playing politics. But what if that logic crashes headfirst into Sakazuki's justice? Because Akainu doesn't see a prophecy. He sees a threat. He already punched a hole through Ace to prevent the rise of the next pirate king. Now you're telling him the real Joy Boy is right there and they're supposed to bargain? No chance. Akainu demands immediate execution. No deals, no Yonko custody, no betting on the new age. He calls out Sengoku. He calls out Garp. He even calls out the Gorosei by implication. If the Marines hesitate now, absolute justice means nothing. And suddenly, it's not pirates versus Marines anymore. It's Marine versus Marine. Here's the kicker. Kizaru is watching all of this like it's an experiment. Lightspeed calm. In the original timeline, he just follows orders and tests opponents. In this timeline, he still obeys Sengoku's command to stand down on the surface, but he's quietly mapping every weakness in the red-haired pirates. Tracking Ben Beckman's range, Lucky Roo's reaction time, Usopp's sightlines. How far can a Yonko push the world government with a single hostage? Kizaru wants that data, and above them, the split becomes official. Sengoku and Garp lean toward containment, Luffy protected by Shanks, away from public eyes, a Joy Boy on ice. Akainu pushes for execution and threatens to resign or revolt if they bend. The Gorosei, listening through Den Mushi, press for a compromise that keeps Luffy alive but shackled, so they can study, control, or even weaponize Nika. This is where Shanks goes from savior to strategist. He offers to take full responsibility for Joy Boy. Luffy becomes his pirate under his flag, away from the cameras. To Akainu, it's betrayal. To Sengoku, it's the least catastrophic option. To the Gorosei, it's a temporary bandage on a ticking time bomb. But what if that's exactly what Shanks wants? While Marine leadership tears itself apart over Luffy's fate, Shanks walks away with the living key to the final war and the political capital of being the reasonable emperor. And as we'll see next, once Joy Boy sails under a traitor's flag, the entire endgame of the story instantly changes. Macro consequences: a world where Shanks owns Joy Boy. So now we jump into the scariest version of this what if. The war ends, the cannons go silent, and the world wakes up to a headline that feels like a bad joke. Joy Boy has been contained, not by the world government, by Shanks. In the original timeline, Shanks walks out of Marineford as the savior who stopped the bloodshed and protected Luffy. But in this timeline, ladies and gentlemen, the newspapers scream that the red-haired emperor has taken custody of the Straw Hat Boy, identified by the Gorosei as the potential Joy Boy, and sailed away. Instantly, the entire power map of the sea gets redrawn in everyone's heads. You see, this creates a chilling new status quo. One Yonko isn't just a ruler of territory anymore. He's the unofficial warden of the future. Islands whisper that Joy Boy is on a red ship, locked behind the smile of the man who once bet his arm on the new age. Is Shanks a hero who keeps Nika away from Imu, or the jailer who keeps him away from true freedom? Pirate morale shatters in two directions at once. On one side, you have the old guard and the dreamers who saw Luffy's charge at Marineford as the spark of a new era. To them, Shanks has betrayed the sea itself. They call him the Yonko, who chained hope. He's a traitor to Roger's will. Supernova like Kid and Apu? They're foaming at the mouth, suddenly obsessed with hunting down red hair just to prove the era can't be leashed. But what if a huge wave moves the other way? There's an entire faction that flocks to Shanks. Because from their perspective, he's the only monster who can stand against both the world government and Blackbeard at the same time while holding Joy Boy as a deterrent. Join Shanks, and you're protecting the Chosen One. Oppose him, and you're threatening the last safeguard against Imu's wrath. Here's the kicker. The world government loves this. Publicly, they rage. Secretly, the Gorosei run the numbers and start treating Shanks like a necessary evil. They quietly reduce direct conflict with his fleet, redirecting admirals toward weaker pirates, rogue supernova, and revolutionary cells. Why risk a full-on Yonko war when Shanks is doing the one thing they need most, keeping Joy Boy out of open rebellion? Meanwhile, what actually happens to Luffy on that red ship? Is he chained in a cabin, hockey suppressed, listening to the drums of liberation only in his dreams? Is he subjected to subtle brainwashing, a constant barrage of freedom is suicide speeches until his will cracks? Or does Shanks take the cruelest route, a twisted mentor-student relationship where he trains Luffy, shares sake, and then carefully reshapes his ideals away from tearing down the system? Let's dive into the long game. A world where Shanks owns Joy Boy is balanced on a knife's edge. Blackbeard is scheming, Dragon is watching, the Gorosei are gambling, and somewhere on that ship, either Luffy is quietly forging the rage for a cataclysmic awakening, or Shanks is inching toward the moment he has to decide: kill the boy he raised, or join him and turn that fragile balance into all-out war against the world. And that choice? That's where this timeline truly explodes. Pattern interrupt. What if Shanks never betrays? Until the final island? But what if that explosion doesn't happen at Marineford, or Wano, or even in some secret raid on Mary Jawai's, but at the very end of the world? What if Shanks never betrays Luffy at all, until the final island itself? In the original timeline, we still don't know exactly how Shanks fits into the endgame. He walks into Mary Jawai's, talks to the Gorosei, and then disappears, like he's playing 4D chess while everyone else is stuck at checkers. But in this timeline, we flip the script. Shanks is ride or die for Luffy all the way through Wano, Egghead, and the final war. No secret backstabs, no Marineford handover. He's the red-haired shield standing between Luffy and the world government. Picture it. When the Great War against Imu and the Gorosei finally erupts, you don't just have the Straw Hats and their allies. You have the red-haired pirates charging in beside them, Ben Beckman sniping celestial dragon fleets out of the sky, Yasopp covering Usopp's back as father and son fire a rain of hockey-infused shots, Shanks himself crossing blades with the God's Knights while Luffy in Gear 5 laughs in the face of a literal god. The world government falls back. The ancient weapons awaken, the seas are roaring, and instead of turning on Luffy here, Shanks doubles down. He bets his arm, his crew, and his life on this new Joy Boy, and wins. Together, they punch a hole through 800 years of oppression. Then comes the voyage that changes everything. 2 Emperor fleets, side by side, chasing the last road poneglyph. The world watches in terror and awe as the Straw Hat flag and the Red Hair flag sail together toward Laugh-Tale. It's Roger's final journey, echoed and amplified. Where Roger had 1 crew, this alliance has 2. Where Roger laughed, These pirates are carrying the expectations of the entire planet. And that's when the pattern interrupt hits. They reach Laugh-Tale. The One Piece is real. The true history is revealed. Everyone thinks this is the victory lap. But what if this is where the real betrayal finally happens? As Luffy laughs at the treasure and the story, as the drums of liberation start to echo across the world again, Shanks steps forward. Calm. Serious. He draws Griffin and points it at Luffy. He declares that Joy Boy must not be allowed to use this power freely. That Roger was wrong. That the world can't survive another unchecked era of absolute freedom. Here's the kicker. This isn't a long con. It's a philosophical break. Shanks isn't after power like Blackbeard, and he isn't driven by fear like the Gorosei. He's driven by a different vision of freedom itself. Is real freedom Luffy's chaos, or Shanks' controlled dawn? Is this betrayal about stopping a monster, or stopping a miracle? That's the question that turns Laugh-Tale into the most dangerous battlefield of all. If final antagonists swap, Shanks versus Blackbeard versus Emu. And that brings us to the biggest swap of all. Who actually deserves the throne as Luffy's final enemy? Because in the original timeline, everyone expects Blackbeard or Emu to sit at the top of that pyramid. But what if this betrayal timeline quietly rewires who the real last boss is? Let's start with Blackbeard. You see, Teach is already built as Luffy's dark mirror. Same pirate dream, opposite soul. Luffy wants freedom so everyone can laugh. Blackbeard wants freedom so he can take everything. In the original timeline, he lurks in the shadows, snatching Ace, stealing Whitebeard's fruit, waiting for Marineford to end so he can pick the bones clean. He's chaos. He's opportunism. He's what happens when I'll Be Pirate King is driven by greed instead of joy. So in this timeline, where even with Shanks' betrayal, Blackbeard is still that storm on the horizon. He's the pirate who abuses the age that Luffy and Shanks helped create. The one who turns the sea is free into the strong devour the weak. A final clash with Teach is Luffy punching the worst version of his own path. Satisfying? Definitely. But also expected. Then you have Emu, the hidden sovereign. The shadow sitting above the Gorosei, above the Marines, above the celestial dragons. Emu is the system itself, the one Joy Boy is prophesied to overturn. In the original timeline, a final battle against Emu is Luffy versus the faceless cage that's been choking the world since the Void Century. It's the classic shonen payoff. Tear down the throne, free the oppressed, fulfill the dawn. But what if we put Shanks in between those two extremes? Well, not pure chaos like Blackbeard, not pure oppression like Emu. Instead, a beloved pirate hero who shares Luffy's language of dreams, sake cups, and grins, but chooses control over absolute freedom. In this timeline, Shanks walks into Mary Geoise, talks to the Gorosei, steals Nika, bets his arm on Luffy, and then decides the only way to avoid another ancient catastrophe is to guide, limit, and, if needed, stop Joy Boy himself. Here's the kicker. A final battle against Shanks isn't Luffy versus evil. It's Luffy versus the corruption of his own dream's origin. The man who gave him the hat. The man who showed him what a pirate even is. When Luffy throws that last punch, he isn't just rejecting the world government or Blackbeard's greed. He's rejecting his idol's compromises, saying, your version of the dawn isn't enough. So which ending hits harder? Luffy smashing Emu's empty throne, beating Blackbeard's monstrous ambition, or surpassing the red-haired legend who once knelt to put that straw hat on his head? As this timeline races toward Laugh-Tale, the real question becomes, when those three forces finally collide, who does Luffy choose to face first? And who does he save for last? Emotional peak. The moment Luffy says Shanks' name. And that's where all these timelines finally sharpen into one question. When Luffy stands in front of Shanks, what does he say? We've been teasing it for arcs now in this timeline. Vegapunk dropping logs about a red-haired pirate who negotiated over the Nika fruit. Garp hinting through clenched teeth that someone important blocked him from protecting Luffy after Marineford. And the Gorosei whispering about a Yonko who understands the balance better than anyone. Each reveal doesn't break Luffy instantly. It just sits there, festering. You see, this isn't one sudden heel turn. It's a slow, ugly realization that Shanks has been moving pieces against him from the shadows. In the original timeline, Shanks is the distant, smiling mentor. But in this timeline, every reunion keeps getting delayed. At Wano's shores, Luffy looks to the horizon, expecting that red ship. And it sails away toward Mary Geoise instead. At Egghead, Vegapunk confirms it. The man who stole the Gomu Gomu no Mi later walked into the Holy Land to discuss a pirate with a straw hat. That's when everyone on the Sunny goes quiet. Because there's only one person that could be. So when the confrontation finally happens, it has to be mythic. On Marineford 2.0, or Laugh Tale itself. Picture this: the sea split, 2 Yonko crews facing off, the world watching through stolen Den Mushi feeds. Luffy steps forward, hat brim shadowing his eyes. Gear 5's carefree bounce completely gone. No goofy grin, no starstruck Shanks like Fuchsia Village, just silence. And then, for the first time, he says that name like a challenge. Red-haired Shanks. The crowd feels it instantly. That's not a disciple greeting his hero. That's a rival calling out the man who chained his future. And here's the kicker. Luffy doesn't ask, "Why did you betray me?" He's not a broken kid begging for answers. He already knows enough. Vegapunk's data, Garp's regrets, the Gorosei's fear. So instead, he says something that flips their entire relationship on its head. "You don't have to believe in me. I'm done chasing your back. I've got my crew. I've got my freedom. That's all I need." Suddenly, all those flashbacks hit different. The arm Shanks lost. The hat he placed on Luffy's head. The promise to bring this back when you're a great pirate. Depending on the variant, Shanks' expression tells the whole story. In one route, there's a flicker of regret, like he really did bet his arm on the new age, and now hates what the world forced him to become. In another, there's quiet pride. Luffy finally cut the last thread himself, and in the darkest branch, his eyes are ice cold. A man who chose the world's balance over one boy's dream. But in every version, Luffy doesn't flinch. He lifts the straw hat, not as a relic of Shanks' era, but as a declaration that that era is over. "I'll become Pirate King." Not because of that promise. In spite of it. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the moment the red-haired legend stops being Luffy's North Star and becomes the storm he has to sail through. So once that chain is broken, what does the world do when its 2 greatest symbols of freedom aim their cannons at each other? Power escalation. Does Shanks' betrayal unlock Luffy's final form? Because once those cannons are aimed, we have to ask one terrifying question. Does Shanks' betrayal just break Luffy? Or does it unlock something the world has never seen? You see, in the original timeline, Luffy's biggest jumps never came from training arcs alone. They came from emotional explosions. Gear 2 was born on Eni's lobby, from pure frustration at being too slow to save Robin. Gear 4 came on Dressrosa, it's from desperation as Doflamingo toyed with his friends and the entire country. Gear 5? That was Luffy literally dying on Onigashima, then awakening Nika at the brink of death and pure liberation. But what if this betrayal is bigger than all of that combined? Not a single friend in danger, not a country, his entire identity. In this timeline, when Shanks turns his back, whether that's at Marineford, at Laugh Tale's doorstep, or right after Wano, Luffy isn't just pushed past his physical limit. He's forced to question what it even means to be a pirate, a captain, a friend. Did he build his dream on a lie? Was the hat he treasured a blessing? Or a chain? Here's the kicker. Nika is the embodiment of freedom. The fruit didn't awaken when Luffy was calm. It awakened when he refused to stay dead, refused to stay beaten, refused to stay under anyone's thumb. So what happens when the one person he trusted most tries to put him in a box? To control his destiny? That's when we get something beyond Gear 5. A Joy Boy overdrive. Imagine Gear 5's cartoon chaos, but cranked to a level where the world itself starts choosing sides. Luffy laughs, but it's not goofy anymore, it's defiant. His heartbeat drums like a war anthem. Reality starts bending not just around his body, but around his will. Flags across the battlefield suddenly lose their symbols. The world government's sun, pirate Jolly Rogers, even the red hair flag, all wiped clean, as if the concept of allegiance itself is being erased in his presence. Chains? They don't just stretch, they liquefy into rubber, snap back, and fling their jailers instead. Seastone cuffs soften, sag, and then crumble off prisoners like melted wax. And then we get the real pattern interrupt. For a moment, even the sea reacts. The waves under Luffy's feet soften, not turning to rubber, but losing their hostility. Just enough for him to bounce off the surface like a living drum, defying the one rule every devil fruit user is born under. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not just a power-up. That's reality itself rejecting control. And this is where Whitebeard's prophecy comes roaring back, when he warned Marineford of a war that would engulf the world. What if he wasn't just talking about Yonko, Marines, and revolutionaries clashing? What if he felt that someday, Joy Boy's liberated will would be so overwhelming that the very rules of the story would get rewritten? In this timeline, Shanks' betrayal is the spark. Joy Boy Overdrive is the wildfire. So if Luffy reaches that state, what does the final battlefield even look like when we head into the last war? Crew spotlights, Zoro, Usopp, and the Shanks connection. So when that Joy Boy Overdrive battlefield finally erupts, it's not just Luffy and Shanks staring each other down. It's the shadows standing behind them. And two of the most important shadows? Zoro and Usopp. Let's dive into how this betrayal hits them, because this is where the emotional fabric of the crew really starts to tear. In the original timeline, Zoro respects Shanks as one of those rare captains who actually lives up to the title of Emperor. A man strong enough that even Mihawk pauses his duel hobby to go say hi at Marineford. But what if, in this timeline, that same legend is the one who used Luffy as a pawn and then tried to hand him over to the world government? For Zoro, that's blasphemy. This is the guy who bowed his head to Mihawk at Barati, who was willing to give up his dream for Luffy's life at Thriller Bark. So once the truth comes out, Zoro's entire code crystallizes into one brutal rule. If you threaten my captain's dream, I cut you down. Yonko, hero, man who stopped Marineford, it doesn't matter. You see, Shanks stops being an icon and becomes a target. Here's the kicker. That puts him directly on a collision course with Ben Beckman. Right hand versus right hand. In the original timeline, Beckman's that cool uncle who makes Kizaru sweat. But in this timeline, he's the shield that let Shanks' plan reach this point. So on the final battlefield, ice while Luffy and Shanks shake the sky, Zoro and Beckman are trading hockey-clad blows that crack the sea, both of them fighting for what they think a captain should be. But if Zoro's conflict is about ideals, Usopp's is about family. Because Shanks betraying Luffy means something way more personal for him. Usopp chose that man over his own son. Remember, in the original timeline, Usopp always talked about his dad, with this mix of pride and hurt. The brave warrior of the sea who left him, but who he still wants to stand beside one day. Now imagine learning that the crew your dad sailed with stole the Nika fruit, raised Luffy like a loaded gun, and then tried to cash him in at Mariejois. Suddenly, every tall tale Usopp ever told about the great red-haired pirates feels poisoned. On the battlefield, and we get the confrontation we never saw at Marineford. Gunshots and explosions everywhere, and across the smoke, two snipers lock eyes. Usopp screams over the chaos, demanding answers. Did you know about Luffy? Did you know about the deal with the Gorosei? Did you ever care about me? Or was the red-haired flag all you ever loved? Usopp hesitates. Just for a heartbeat. And that's all it takes for Usopp to pull the trigger. Sharpshooter versus sharpshooter. Observation hockey versus observation hockey. Bullets curving around giants and pacifistas as father and son try to read each other's hearts through their aim. Every missed shot is a memory. Every hit is an accusation. All of this feeds the larger war. Zoro cutting through Beckman to clear a path for Luffy. Usopp sniping down red hair officers, tears mixing with gunpowder. That's because if Shanks is the enemy, then the childhood dream of sailing with Dad has to die too. And here's where it gets really wild, ladies and gentlemen. When the dust settles between these right hands and sharpshooters, who they choose to stand behind might decide whether Shanks actually becomes the final devil of this story, or if someone even darker hijacks the battlefield next. Gorosei reactions? Did they always expect Shanks to turn? But while the snipers are choosing sides, there's another group watching all of this, like it's a chessboard they set up centuries ago. The Gorosei. You see, Shanks walking onto the stage as a betrayer doesn't just shock Luffy and the pirates. It detonates everything the world government has quietly been planning around him. Because in this timeline, the elders don't see Shanks as a mystery. But they see him as a documented anomaly. They have files, long ones. In the original timeline, we only see Shanks stroll into Mary Joaz once, casually asking to talk about a certain pirate. But what if that wasn't a one-off? What if deep under Pangaea Castle, there are entire dossiers tracking his life? His days as the red-haired cabin boy on Roger's ship, his disappearance during the God Valley fallout, his theft of the Gomu Gomu no Mi from a top-secret CP-0 transport, and every time his flag stopped another Yonko from making a move? From the Gorosei's perspective, that's not romance. That's a variable in the Joy Boy equation, a wild card they can't fully solve. Let's dive into their mindset. Even when Shanks walks in and says, "I can deliver Joy Boy to you," do they ever actually trust him? No chance. To them, he's a temporary tool. A blade you hold by the handle for one swing, knowing it'll cut your fingers if you keep it too long. So when Shanks betrays Luffy and hands over Nika, the elders don't breathe easy. They start the countdown. How long until this Yonko turns on them too? Here's the kicker. Inside that room, the elders are not united. You can almost hear the debates. One elder slams his cane and says, "The second Joy Boy is secured, erase Shanks. He knows too much about Roger, Laughtail, and the Void Century." Another counters, "No, we keep him." With Whitebeard gone, Kaido dead or weakened, and Luffy neutralized, we still need a pirate buffer against Blackbeard and the Revolutionary Army. So now you've got a split. Execute the traitor tool, or keep the devil you know to stall Teach, Dragon, and even rogue marines like Garp and Kuzan in this timeline. Or that argument alone could change which elder ends up personally stepping onto the battlefield later. And above them all, Emu. Silent. Watching. Pattern interrupt. What if Shanks isn't just a political risk, but a personal threat to Emu? Imagine Emu staring at an ancient mural of Joy Boy's crew, and there's a red-haired figure standing beside him. Or a swordsman who looks eerily like Shanks, blade raised against the first king of the world. Suddenly, Shanks isn't just the man who bet his arm on the New Age. He's a ghost of an enemy Emu once failed to erase. So in any betrayal timeline, Shanks is playing with fire. By inserting himself between Joy Boy and the world government, he guarantees one thing. Once Luffy and Nika outlive the first trap, and once the Gorosei and Emu no longer need a red-haired middleman, and both sides will eventually turn on him. And when that happens, ladies and gentlemen, the question becomes, does Shanks die as a villain, or as the final unwanted martyr of the old era? If Ace lived, Shanks' betrayal in an Ace survival timeline. So let's crank the chaos up even further. We've talked about Shanks becoming the unwanted martyr of the old era, but what if Marineford itself already planted that seed of betrayal in a timeline where Ace actually lives? In the original timeline, Luffy breaks the chains, Ace turns to defend his little brother, and Akainu lands the fatal blow. Tragedy. Full stop. But what if Luffy still saves Ace, still punches that key moment into existence, and the two brothers actually escape the execution platform together? The battlefield is roaring. Whitebeard's forces are retreating. Everyone thinks the war is finally tilting their way. And then Shanks arrives. In this timeline, he doesn't just walk in to stop the war. He walks in to change the endgame. Imagine it. Luffy and Ace, bloodied but alive, sprinting toward the bay when the red force cuts across the horizon. Everyone relaxes for half a second. Shanks is here. We're saved. You see the irony already, right? Here's the kicker. Instead of drawing his sword against Akainu, Shanks makes his move on the real prize. Joy Boy's vessel. He offers a deal to Sengoku and the Gorosei, watching from afar. The war ends. Whitebeard's remnants are allowed to retreat, in exchange for Luffy. Not dead, captured, contained, used, and he's willing to swing on anyone who gets in the way, including Ace. How does Ace react to that? This is the son of Roger. Ai's the man who grew up hating his blood, who slowly came to respect his father's legacy through stories from Whitebeard and Shanks. Shanks was the friendly face of the Pirate King's era, the guy who laughed with Luffy and Fuchsia and toasted to the next generation. Now Ace watches that same man point a blade at his little brother's neck. That's not just betrayal, that's spitting on Roger's will. Ace turns back, instantly. He ignores Whitebeard's orders to retreat, ignores Marco screaming his name, and walks straight toward Shanks. Two heirs of Roger's will, two conquerors who both carry his spirit, colliding in the middle of a collapsing Marineford. Their hockey tears the sky. Fodder drops. Even the admirals feel that pressure and hesitate. Who do you even root for in that moment? Let's dive into the aftermath. Ace survives. Luffy survives. Shanks doesn't get his clean capture, but he's exposed. The brothers know the red-haired mentor is an enemy of their freedom. Post-war, instead of Luffy training alone with Rayleigh, Ace tags along. Imagine those two on Rusakaina, clashing conquerors hockey every day while Rayleigh drills them on advanced armament and observation, not just to face the new world, but to one day topple a Yonko they once loved. And this is where the stakes explode. It's no longer just Joy Boy versus the world. It's the full inherited will of Roger's generation. Rayleigh, Ace, Luffy, even Whitebeard's lingering influence, rising up against the one man who chose control over freedom. And when those wills finally collide with Shanks' secret agenda, the final war stops being a simple pirate versus government showdown and becomes a three-way execution of the old era itself. Because next, we have to ask, what happens when Blackbeard smells that fracture and crashes the party? Marineford 2.0, a second war sparked by Shanks' choice. Because when Blackbeard crashes that fracture, ladies and gentlemen, the world doesn't just shake, it resets. In the original timeline, Marineford was the peak, a single island, a single execution. But what if the sequel war doesn't happen at Marineford at all, and instead explodes right at the holy land of Mary Joas, or on a neutral island floating at the edge of Laugh-Tale itself? In this timeline, Shanks' betrayal doesn't just wound Luffy emotionally, it tears open the sky and forces every major power to move at once. You see, Once Shanks hands Luffy over or sells out his location for a secret deal, Blackbeard instantly smells blood. He's already stolen powers, already toppled Yonko, and now he wants the ultimate prize, Joy Boy himself. So he sails straight for the new war zone, dragging his entire fleet, his titanic captains, and whatever twisted devil fruit collection he's built up since Marineford. At the same time, the world government can't ignore this. The Gorosei descend. Imu's shadow looms. Admirals, Seraphim, God's Knights. Everyone is deployed to defend their holy right to rule. And then Luffy awakens. Full Nika, full Joy Boy. Drums of liberation echoing so loud they rattle the red line. Marineford 2.0 isn't a rescue mission anymore. It's a collision of ideologies. Let's dive into the battle lines. On one side you've got Luffy's alliance, the Straw Hats, Law, and the Heart Pirates, the Wano Samurai, the Grand Fleet, and in this branch, Ace lives and roars back onto the stage, blue plasma flames splitting the heavens next to his brother's white lightning. On another side, Blackbeard's monstrous armada, laughing as islands crumble, then the world government with their full divine arsenal, and finally, Shanks' faction, standing dead center as the wild card everyone is forced to react to. Here's the kicker. Every faction has to decide what Shanks is to them. Is he a traitor to pirate kind, a secret ally of the Gorosei, or just an expendable pawn who finally overplayed his hand? That's why the matchups in this war hit so much harder. Luffy versus Shanks isn't a friendly duel anymore. It's student versus rigged mentor. Freedom versus controlled peace. Zoro's blades crash against Beckman's haki in a surgical, terrifying clash of right hands. Usopp faces Yasopp through tears and bullets, sniping across a battlefield where father and son have to decide which future they're really shooting for. Dragon finally steps out of the shadows, squaring off against the Gorosei themselves amidst falling chunks of the red line, while Garp and Akainu slam into each other in a brutal round 2 that shakes the seas. A marine legend versus the man who defined absolute justice at Marineford. And through all of this, alliances snap and reform in real time. Blackbeard teams with the government for 5 minutes just to target Joy Boy. Shanks blocks an admiral to keep his own plan alive, then turns his blade on Luffy the next second. Like, who's actually on whose side when the dust settles? Because this war isn't about territory, bounties, or titles anymore. It's about deciding what the next era's definition of freedom really is, and Shanks' betrayal is the spark that lit the final fuse. But what if the One Piece itself gets revealed mid-battle and completely flips which side you're even rooting for? Psychological endgame. Does Luffy forgive Shanks? So if the One Piece is suddenly on the table and every flag is flying at once, where does that leave Luffy and Shanks? Because this isn't just a power clash anymore. This is a psychological endgame. In the original timeline, Luffy worships Shanks as the man who showed him the sea and handed him that straw hat. But what if, in this timeline, then that same man stands exposed as a traitor right as the truth of the world drops? You see, the first route is pure vengeance. No speeches, no tears. Just Luffy walking through a battlefield of Yonko and admirals, Gear 5 drums shaking the sky, to beat Shanks down with the same stubborn fury he used at Marineford. Luffy wins, decisively. He doesn't ask why Shanks met the Gorosei. He doesn't care what deal was made over his Nika fruit. He just takes off the hat, the symbol of his entire dream, and drops it at Shanks' feet. Not gently. It hits the ground like a gavel. Bond over. Era over. And that cold, surgical rejection instantly tells everyone watching, from Blackbeard to Imu to Ace in the surviving timelines, that Luffy will cut even his own heroes down if they change someone else's freedom. But what if we flip it? On second route, tragic forgiveness. Shanks does betray him. He delivers Luffy to Mary Joyce or stands aside when Imu moves in, and the scar this leaves on Luffy is brutal. Yet when the final war erupts and Imu's weapon is aimed at Luffy, it's Shanks who steps in and takes the hit. Red hair burning away in ancient light, blade shattering as he blocks an attack meant for Joy Boy himself. Luffy holds him as the world crumbles. Shanks tries to apologize, tries to explain the bet on the new age that went wrong. And Luffy, through gritted teeth, chooses to remember Fuchsia Village. The bar. The Sea King. The arm that was sacrificed. He doesn't excuse the betrayal, but he refuses to let Shanks' last page be written as pure villainy. That choice changes how he treats every future traitor, every wavering ally in his fleet. But here's the kicker. The third path is way harsher and way more mature. Luffy neither fully forgives nor fully hates him. He accepts that one person can carry insane kindness and disgusting cowardice at the same time. Instead of obsessing over Shanks, he turns outward and says, "I'll build a world where kids don't get raised as weapons for anyone's plan. Not the Marines, not the revolutionaries, not the Yonko." That decision becomes his leadership blueprint. When a captain in the Grand Fleet betrays him to save their own island, does Luffy control them, or let them choose their own ruin? When Dragon wants to weaponize Nika's image, does Luffy allow propaganda for the greater good, or burn that control to the ground? So we end on the hardest question. Does true freedom include the freedom to make terrible choices, even for Shanks? Also, and if it does, can Luffy live with a world where the man he once idolized chose wrong, on purpose, and still refuse to chain anyone ever again? Symbolism shattered. The straw hat after betrayal. So if freedom means letting Shanks choose wrong on purpose, what happens to the symbol he left behind? Because in this timeline, the real victim of that betrayal isn't just Luffy's heart, it's the straw hat itself. You see, that hat has always been a relay baton. In the original timeline, it goes from Roger to Shanks to Luffy. This clean passing of the Pirate King's will. The promise that a new era will rise and break the world open. Every time Luffy stands back up at Marineford, at Eni's lobby, at Wano, that hat is screaming, "The dream lives on!" But what if the man who passed it down turns out to be the one trying to hijack that dream? And suddenly every flashback hits different. That scene of Kid Luffy crying as Shanks sails away? Now it's not just inspiration. It's the moment the perfect pawn was marked. The hat that once meant, "I believe in you," starts to look like "I'm investing in you," until I cash out. Does Luffy look at it and see hope, or a collar he wore without knowing? Here's the kicker. Luffy's not the kind of person who lets someone else own his story. So in this timeline, the Straw Hat becomes a battlefield long before the final clash. Every time Shanks appears, every time the Gorosei whisper about the Gomu Gomu no Mi, the question hangs in the air. Is Luffy carrying Roger's will, or Shanks' experiment? Now imagine the final fight. Gear 5 drums pounding, Conqueror's Haki tearing the sky, and in the middle of that storm, Shanks' blade finally connects. Not with Luffy's neck, but with the hat. The same way Luffy once protected it with his own body at Marineford. He dives, he twists, and still, the Straw Hat is slashed, burned, maybe even ripped apart by clashing Haki. The symbol of 3 generations, shredded in an instant. What does Luffy do after that? Does Usopp scramble to repair it? Frankie forge some insane protective case, everyone trying to glue the past back together? Or does Luffy pick up the ruined pieces, stare at them, and just let them go? Can you imagine Luffy walking into Laugh Tale bareheaded, declaring that the Pirate King of this era doesn't need a hand-me-down crown? Alternate route, Shanks dies, Luffy wins, the world is watching, and instead of keeping the hat, out he walks to Shanks' grave, or all the way back to Fuchsia Village, and leaves it there. Loop closed, era finished. From that point on, the Thousand Sunnies Jolly Roger, drawn by Luffy and perfected by the crew, becomes the only symbol that matters. Because that's the core question of this whole what if. When the origin of your dream betrays you, do you throw away the dream? Or redefine it so completely that no one else can ever claim they gave it to you? And if Luffy does sail on without that hat, what new symbol rises in its place? And who tries to steal that next? Viewer timeline checkpoint. 3 betrayals, 3 worlds. So let's zoom out for a second. We've watched the hat fall, the trust shatter, and Luffy rebuild himself from nothing. But what if we line up all 3 main betrayal routes side by side and really feel how different this story becomes depending on when Shanks turns? Timeline A is the Fuchsia betrayal. In the original timeline, Shanks loses his arm and bets it on the New Age, smiling as he hands Luffy the hat. In this timeline, that smile is a mask. Shanks is the quiet gardener of Joy Boy, pruning Luffy's life from day one. He steals the Nika fruit from the government, not to free it, but to raise it. Every laugh, every drink, every "see you at sea" is calculated. When he finally betrays Luffy back in East Blue, it brands the Straw Hats with a permanent scar. They still sail. They still dream. But they're sharper, more paranoid, trauma-hardened pirates who never again take a friendly Yonko at face value. Then we jump to Timeline B, the Marineford betrayal, where the world itself is the audience. In the original timeline, Shanks arrives like a red-haired angel and stops the war. But in this timeline, he walks onto that battlefield, picks up Luffy's broken, unconscious body, and weaponizes it. Maybe he offers Luffy to the world government in exchange for secret knowledge about the Void Century. Maybe he declares himself Joy Boy's warden, the one man allowed to manage this dangerous sun god. Suddenly, Marineford doesn't end with peace. It ends with a fault line through the Marines. Sengoku, Garp, even Kuzan question what justice means when a Yonko can negotiate with a future god. The balance of power snaps. Shanks stands between Imu and Joy Boy as a self-appointed jailer, and the whole world has to pick a side. Timeline C fast-forwards us to post-Wano, after Luffy has already awakened Nika and claimed his spot among the emperors. You're expecting the reunion, the drink, the laugh, the let's meet at laugh tale. But what if Shanks shows up not to celebrate, but to stop him? In this timeline, Shanks believes Joy Boy must never reach the final island. The red-haired pirates clash with the Straw Hats in a lethal duel of ideals. Freedom versus containment, inherited will versus controlled destiny. Every blow is 10 years of nostalgia breaking apart, and hanging over all of that is the bonus variant, the final island betrayal. Shanks actually sails with Luffy side by side, all the way to the One Piece. They share battles, sake, secrets. Then, on the last shore, when the true history is revealed, the break happens. Shanks wants to use the truth like a scalpel. Luffy wants to drop it like a bomb. So, ladies and gentlemen, which betrayal hits you the hardest? The childhood knife? The public sacrifice? The post-Wano duel? Or the final, last-second cut? Hold that answer, because next we're stacking these timelines against each other to see which one would rewrite One Piece the most. Which betrayal hurts most? Emotional ranking of timelines. So let's actually rank these cuts, because each betrayal hits a different nerve in Luffy's life, and which one destroys you most says a lot about what kind of pain you fear. Lost childhood? Public humiliation? Shattered reunion? Or the final ideological clash at the end of the world? Let's dive into Fuchsia first. In the original timeline, Fuchsia is pure gold, the hat, the arm, the sake cup, the promise. But what if that day was the first move in a long con? In this timeline, the Fuchsia betrayal is the one that murders childhood itself. Every flashback we've ever loved suddenly turns toxic. Luffy remembers Shanks laughing with him and realizes he was being groomed as a vessel for Nika. His dream to become Pirate King doesn't feel like a dream anymore. It feels like a script someone else wrote. For viewers who care most about innocence and found family, this is the one that hurts so bad it's hard to even re-watch episode 1. Marineford betrayal hits a different muscle. This isn't private heartbreak. This is a stadium execution of trust. In the original timeline, Shanks arrives as the ultimate clutch save, shielding Luffy and ending the war. But in this timeline, he walks onto that same battlefield, lifts Luffy's unconscious body. Aden uses him as a bargaining chip in front of Whitebeard's remnants, the admirals, and the entire world watching the broadcast. Suddenly, Marineford becomes the moment Luffy loses Ace and Shanks in one strike. If you're the type who fears public betrayal, being thrown away at your lowest point while everyone sees it, this version is the most brutal thing the story can do. Post-Wano betrayal is the reunion heartbreak. Luffy has Gear 5, Advanced Haki, a Yonko title. He's finally caught up to his hero. This should be their sake toast on the same deck moment. Instead, Shanks rejects him. Maybe he calls Luffy unworthy of the One Piece, or demands he surrender Nika to avoid a bigger catastrophe. The celebration of equality turns into a declaration of distance. For fans who live for that mentor-student payoff, on who wanted Luffy and Shanks to stand shoulder to shoulder like Roger and Whitebeard, this is the stab that twists every expectation you had for the new world. Then we have the final island betrayal, and here's the kicker. It's not about secret evil, it's about clashing answers to the biggest question in One Piece. They reach the last island, uncover the Void Century, the ancient weapons, the real purpose of Nika. Shanks doesn't betray because he hates Luffy. He betrays because he genuinely believes unleashing this truth will destroy the world beyond repair. This is the most philosophically painful route. It says even your greatest bond can't survive a fundamental disagreement about what freedom really means. So which wound hits you hardest? The poisoned childhood, the public sacrifice, the ruined reunion, or the ideological war at the end? Hold that thought, because next we're not just ranking pain. We're asking which betrayal would push Luffy, the Straw Hats, and the entire world into the wildest possible final saga. Lore plausibility. Check. Could Oda actually do this? So here's the terrifying question, ladies and gentlemen. Is a Shanks betrayal actually something Oda would pull, or is this pure fan delirium? Because to answer that, we have to look at how he's been playing the long game with this story since Chapter 1. Oda loves making you rewatch everything with new eyes. You see it with Robin's past. In the original timeline, she was just the shady Baroque works agent, right? But then, Enia's lobby hits, O'Hara is revealed, and suddenly every earlier panel with her becomes tragic instead of suspicious. Right, same with the world government. At first, they're just the law. Then we learn about Buster Calls, CP0, and the Void Century, and the entire moral compass of the series shifts. And then the Nika fruit. For decades, we all thought it was just the Gomu Gomu no Mi. But what if that was the first real taste of how Oda loves to flip the table? One reveal, and Luffy's entire existence gets recontextualized. So does that toolbox support a Shanks twist? On a structural level, yes. Oda is addicted to perspective flips. He plans something early, lets you get comfortable, then suddenly shows you the other side. Shanks walking into Mary Joyce to talk to the Gorosei is exactly that kind of seed. It's innocent if he's just a respected Yonko. It's terrifying if he's a quiet stakeholder in the system Luffy wants to destroy. But here's the kicker. Oda almost never turns beloved characters into cartoonish villains. Garp is a hero, but he let Ace be executed in the original timeline because of his duty. Kuma is a tyrant on paper, but he's literally a walking act of self-sacrifice. Even the Revolutionary Army, good guys on paper, use espionage, terrorism, and collateral damage to shake the world. The pattern isn't secret evil, it's painful gray. That's exactly where a Shanks betrayal would live. And Shanks is built for this. Minimal backstory, no detailed flashback with Roger, no clear explanation of why he stole the Nika fruit from a government ship, barely any on-screen fights. He can stroll into Marineford and stop the war, he can walk into Mary Joyce and chat with the Gorosei, and Oda has never once sat us down and said, "And here is this man's full deal." That mystery is narrative ammunition. It means Oda can fire a massive twist without contradicting explicit canon, just like he did with Nika. Now thematically, would it fit? One Piece is about inherited will, freedom, and chosen family. Shanks is the spark that lit Luffy's dream. But what if the final test is proving that dream doesn't belong to Shanks at all? That Luffy's freedom isn't borrowed from his idol, it's his own. A clash of ideals. Luffy's absolute freedom versus Shanks' controlled balance of the seas philosophy would hit those themes harder than any random villain ever could. So could Oda have Shanks sell Luffy to the Gorosei for selfish gain? That full malicious heel turn feels off, but a tragic collision of goals? Shanks trying to save the world in a way that betrays Luffy personally? And that is absolutely in Oda's narrative toolbox. And if that's on the table, then the real question becomes, when does he pull the trigger? Fuchsia, Marineford, or the race for the One Piece itself? If Shanks betrays, who replaces him as Luffy's North Star? And that brings us to the real emotional earthquake of this what if. If Shanks is the one who pulls the trigger, who replaces him in Luffy's heart? In the original timeline, Shanks is the North Star, the hat, the arm, the promise. But what if that symbol shatters? Who keeps Luffy pointed toward the horizon instead of straight into madness? You see, this is where the story quietly shifts from boy chasing his hero to captain carried by his crew. In this timeline, the first thing that happens after the betrayal isn't Luffy finding a new idol. It's the Straw Hats closing ranks. Now Zoro, who already told Luffy at Thriller Bark that a captain's dream comes first, instantly becomes a living reminder that someone is still willing to bleed for Luffy's future. Nami, who once stabbed her own shoulder to break from Arlong, becomes proof that you can cut ties with the past and still chase the sky. Sanji, who walked away from Zeph's restaurant, embodies choosing your found family over the people who raised you. Usopp, he's the clearest mirror, the coward who left and came back stronger, now watching Luffy get abandoned by the man he trusted most. Chopper, the monster who was saved by a quack doctor and then by a rubber idiot, decides Luffy doesn't need a legend. He needs a doctor for his heart. Robin, who already lost every mentor figure she ever had, quietly shows Luffy how to live after the world government. After Ohara, after betrayal. Frankie, Brook, Jinbe, each of them has already rebuilt themselves from ruins. Together, they become a constellation. No single star, just a sky of people who chose him. But let's dive into the old generation too, because not every relic of the past is a manipulator. Rayleigh stands in direct contrast to Shanks here. At Sabaody, he didn't groom Luffy for an agenda. He trained him, then let him go. No strings, no secret Gorosei meetings. In this timeline, Rayleigh becomes the anti-Shanks, the mentor who refuses to steer Luffy's destiny, and that absence of control is exactly what makes him trustworthy. Then we have Garp and Dragon. If Shanks falls from grace, Luffy is forced to reevaluate his bloodline, not as some destined legacy, but as two men who made brutal choices in the same broken world. Now Garp chose the Marines and justice. Dragon chose revolution and chaos. Neither is clean, neither is safe. But their flaws help Luffy understand something crucial. Adults are not gods. They're just people. And that realization kills the pedestal Shanks once stood on. Here's the kicker. The real North Star might not be a person at all. It's the sea itself. The idea of adventure, freedom, and laughter that no Yonko, no Marine, no hero can own. In a world where Nika is literally the god of liberation, Luffy's guiding light becomes that rhythm of drums, that feeling of breaking chains, not serving someone's master plan. So even in the darkest betrayal timeline, the core message survives. Your dream is yours, not Shanks, not Rayleigh's, not Garp's or Dragon's. You choose who truly sails with you, and that choice is what makes you Pirate King material. But if Luffy's North Star changes, how does that reshape the final war when he and Shanks finally clash for real? Ultimate what-if fusion, the darkest possible Shanks timeline. So let's answer that. If Luffy's North Star changes, we fuse every dark route into one nightmare timeline where Shanks is mentor, betrayer, warlord, and final gatekeeper of the Pirate King dream. In the original timeline, Shanks inspires Luffy in Fuchsia and disappears. But what if he doesn't just inspire him? He grooms him? In this timeline, every Seki Cup, every story about Roger, every word about betting his arm on the new age is calculated. Shanks steals the Nika fruit not to free it, but to place it on the perfect pawn. As he leaves East Blue only after confirming Luffy's will is unbreakable and perfectly aligned with the role Joy Boy must play. Fast forward to Marineford. The war still explodes. Ace is on the platform. Luffy crashes the execution like a storm. You see, everyone thinks Shanks is late again. Then he arrives, right on schedule. He stops the blades, halts the cannons, and walks through the battlefield with that same calm swagger. But this time, when he picks up Luffy's unconscious body, he doesn't protect him. He hands him to the world government as the contained Joy Boy, the weapon safely in its sheath. Here's the kicker. Ace survives. Garp snaps for real. Dragon moves in the shadows, and the chaos lets Ace escape with a critically wounded Luffy. Instead of dying in his brother's arms, Ace is the one dragging Luffy's broken body to Rayleigh on Rusakaina. And under the Dark King, those two don't just train to survive the New World. They train to break Shanks, Blackbeard, and the Gorosei in one three-front final war. Let's dive into Egghead. In this timeline, Vegapunk's broadcasts don't just expose the Void Century, they expose Shanks himself. We learn he walked into Mary Joasei for years, meeting the Gorosei as their pirate mediator. We see flashbacks of Roger, Shanks, and the Gorosei arguing about Nika, about who should control the Dawn. Luffy is forced to realize his entire life has been wrapped in a centuries-old plan, with Shanks as the smiling project leader. Post-Wano, when the red-hair pirates finally move, it's not for a friendly duel. Shanks crowns himself the gatekeeper of Laughtail, where Blackbeard races for the same prize. Emu pulls the strings from Merry Joys, and Ace and Luffy sail, knowing they're walking into a final storm where every Yonko and every Secret King is waiting. The climax, it all converges at the top of the world. Merry Joys shattered by ancient weapons, or Laughtail itself torn open. Shanks stands for controlled freedom. Blackbeard stands for pure chaos. Emu stands for eternal order. Joy Boy Luffy stands for something else. No one gets to own the future. Luffy defeats Shanks after a heartbreaking Gear 5 versus Conqueror's duel, topples Emu's god complex, and outwits Blackbeard's schemes. And then, he does the unthinkable. He refuses the throne of the world and smashes the very idea that one will should rule everyone. But if no one sits on top anymore, who fills the vacuum when the Age of Kings finally ends? Back to canon. Why Shanks' mystery is powerful, even without betrayal. And that question brings us right back to where it all started. Because in the original timeline, there is no throne, no betrayal, no Gear 5 clash on the edge of the world between Luffy and Shanks. There's just a red-haired pirate who smiles at a crying kid, puts a hat on his head, and bets his arm on the new age. You see, in canon, Shanks has done nothing but push Luffy upward. He saves Luffy from the Sea King. He steals the Gomu Gomu no Mi from a world government ship. He walks into Marineford like it's his living room, stops the war, and protects Luffy's unconscious body when everyone else wants him dead. He celebrates Luffy's bounties from afar. He's toasting with his crew as that kid from Fuchsia keeps shaking the world. On paper, that's the ultimate mentor. So why did we spend all this time asking what if he stabbed Luffy in the back? Because imagining betrayal doesn't mean we suddenly think it's guaranteed. It shows you how much narrative weight Shanks actually carries in this story. He isn't just a guy who gave Luffy a hat. He's the symbol of the promise. The man who literally said, "I'm betting this arm on the new age," and then vanished into the currents of history. Here's the kicker. The fact that we can plausibly see Shanks as either Luffy's final ally or his final obstacle means Oda has built something insanely rare. A character who can walk into Mary Joas, sit down with the Gorosei, stop Marineford with a single sentence, and still feel like a mystery. Right? We don't know his full strength. We don't know his full past. We don't know what he really wants when he says he's going to claim the One Piece. But what if that's the point? Even if Shanks never betrays Luffy, the tensions we played with in this timeline, ideological clashes, generational conflict, the burden of inherited dreams, can still show up in softer, more heartbreaking ways. What happens when Luffy's free, chaotic Nika energy runs headfirst into whatever careful balance Shanks has been maintaining with the world government? What if they want the same dream, but refuse to walk the same path to get there? Let's dive into how you watch canon now. Go back to Fuchsia Village. Rewatch that hat scene. Rewatch Shanks facing Whitebeard, or standing on the execution platform at Marineford, or walking into Mary Joyce to talk about a certain pirate. Suddenly, every smile feels loaded. Every silence feels dangerous. Every off-screen meeting feels like a ticking time bomb. We don't need an answer yet. That's suspense. The not knowing whether Shanks is the ultimate shield or the final wall is part of the thrill. And as we push toward Laugh Tale, the question isn't just, will Shanks betray Luffy? It's, what role will he choose when the truth of the world finally surfaces? Recap. 3 ways Shanks could break the world and Luffy. So when we zoom out, ladies and gentlemen, this whole theory hasn't really been about, will Shanks betray Luffy, so much as, when does he pull the trigger? And what part of Luffy does he break? Because each betrayal window hits a different nerve in the story. In Fuchsia Village, the betrayal is pure emotional origin. In the original timeline, Shanks loses his arm, smiles, and says it's a bet on the new age. He becomes Luffy's first hero. But what if that same moment is a setup? In this timeline, the hat, the fruit, the rescue aren't proof of kindness. They're the first links in a chain. Betraying Luffy here doesn't just hurt him, it rewrites his entire childhood, turns the I'm gonna surpass Shanks dream into a scar that never closes. Then we jump to Marineford, the public turning point. In the original timeline, Shanks ends the war, protects Luffy, and flexes enough clout that even Sengoku backs down. But what if he walks in, lifts Luffy's unconscious body, and instead of shielding him, hands him to the world government as the awakened Nika they've been hunting? Instantly, Marineford becomes the day the world sees Shanks not as a savior, but as the kingmaker of a new order. Post-Wano and Final Saga is where the betrayal becomes ideological endgame. After Gear 5, after Luffy is Joy Boy confirmed, a heel turn here isn't about raising a pawn, it's about containing a god. Shanks meets the Gorosei, knows about the Gomu Gomu no Mi being Nika, understands Roger's will, Whitebeard's prophecy, even hints of Vegapunk's research. If he chooses to stand against Luffy now, he's not just betraying a kid he inspired, he's rejecting the very idea of the man who will change the world. And look at the fallout we've played with across these timelines. Straw Hat dynamics cracking as Usopp, Zoro, and Jinbei question whether Luffy's trust is a liability. Marines splitting between Akainu hardliners, Kobe and Garp loyalists, and those swayed by Shanks' supposed stability. Yonko power shifts where Shanks either replaces Kaido as the iron wall of the status quo, or becomes a darker version of Blackbeard with a cleaner brand. You see, the Joy Boy question becomes terrifying. Is Shanks trying to protect Nika, weaponize Nika, or erase Nika? That's where Marineford 2.0 comes in, an endgame war where instead of Shanks arriving to stop the slaughter, he's the one forcing Luffy to fight for his own freedom, his crew's future, and the very meaning of the Pirate King. All those lore crumbs, Mary Joyce meetings, the stolen Gomu Gomu, Roger's last journey, Whitebeard's man who will shake the world speech, Vegapunk's Void Century notes. They stop being random mysteries and start feeling like pieces on Shanks' board. So now the toolbox is in your hands. Now, which timeline hits hardest? Fuchsia Betrayal, Marineford Twist, or Final Saga Showdown? Let's dive into how you would play Shanks' move in the last act. Your turn. Choose your Shanks Betrayal timeline. So now the toolbox is in your hands. You see the pieces, you see the stakes. The only question is, which Shanks Betrayal timeline are you riding with? Fuchsia Village, Marineford, Post-Wano, Final Island? Out of all of them, which one hits you the hardest, and why? Is it Fuchsia, where in the original timeline Shanks lost his arm to save Luffy? But in this timeline, he lets the Lord of the Coast eat the kid and rescues only the Gomu Gomu for the Gorosei? Is that the one that instantly breaks your heart and rewrites the entire story from Chapter 1? Or are you more into Marineford, where instead of saving Luffy on that battlefield, Shanks walks up to Sengoku, drops Luffy's unconscious body, and cashes in a secret deal about Joy Boy? What if your favorite twist is post-Wano? Luffy's just beaten Kaido. Gear 5 is ringing those drums of liberation, and suddenly, Shanks shows up at the shore not as a proud senpai, but as the executioner sent by Mary Joyce. Or do you want the final island betrayal, where they reach Laugh-Tale together, uncover the Void Century, and then Shanks draws his sword and says, "The world can't handle this truth, Luffy." Which timing feels the most devastating to you? I want you all to build your own full timelines in the comments. Go wild. Who lives? Who dies? Does Ace survive Marineford because Shanks sells out Luffy instead? Does Garp defect when he sees Shanks hand his grandson over? Do the Straw Hats fracture? With Zoro hunting Shanks and Usopp frozen because it's his dad's captain? Tell us how Luffy's personality changes in your version. Does he become colder, more like Prime Whitebeard? Or does he double down on that insane faith in his friends, even after the ultimate betrayal? And here's the kicker. Don't just lock Shanks into one role. Flip the script. What if he betrays the Gorosei at the last second, turning their secret alliance into a double-cross and unleashing Nika on Mary Joyce itself? Or what if the betrayal was a long con from the start, and in this timeline Shanks and Luffy actually planned it off-screen at some hidden island, using Luffy as bait to drag Imu and the God's Knights into the open? Tell us which character reaction you want to see fully fleshed out. Is it Usopp versus Yasopp, father and son split over Shanks' choice? Garp versus Shanks, the hero of the Marines throwing hands with the red-haired Yonko he once tolerated? Ace versus Shanks in an Ace Lives branch, blaming him for everything that happened at Marineford? Or Robin walking into the room of authority and confronting the Gorosei about Joy Boy, Shanks, and the stolen Gomu Gomu? Drop your best betrayal timelines below, because ladies and gentlemen, the craziest ones might not stay in the comments. We're watching. The most insane, most coherent, or most heartbreaking universes can get pulled into future episodes, expanded with full arcs, power-ups, and final wars. Let's dive into your Shanks endgame and turn this comment section into our own collaborative One Piece multiverse. Next What If voyage, from betrayed Joy Boy to, and this is just the beginning. Because once you open the door to a betrayed Joy Boy, the entire One Piece multiverse starts to twist. You see, this Shanks betrayal timeline doesn't exist in a vacuum. It instantly connects to every other wild Marineford branch we've been building. What if, in the original timeline, Marineford was Luffy's lowest point? But in this timeline, that same war becomes the moment Ace awakens Conqueror's haki in pure rage at Shanks. Imagine Ace standing over Luffy's broken body, black lightning clashing with Shanks' own, screaming that he'll never let his little brother be used as a pawn again. Does Ace survive that? Or does he become the Dark Emperor the world fears, while Luffy disappears into legend? And then there's Garp. In the original timeline, Garp held himself back, chained by duty. But what if Shanks handing Luffy over is the last straw? Garp doesn't just punch Akainu, he fully rebels. He throws away the coat, breaks the execution platform, and drags Dragon and the revolutionaries into a full-scale war years early. Suddenly, Marineford isn't a rescue mission. It's the opening battle of the final war. Here's the kicker. A betrayed Joy Boy doesn't stay at the same power level. What if that ultimate loss forces Luffy to awaken an even higher Nika form? Something beyond Gear 5? A form born not just from freedom and laughter, but from resolve, sharpened by heartbreak. In this timeline, every drumbeat is a rejection of Shanks' ideals. Every rubber punch a question. Who really gets to decide the shape of the new age? If you want, we can zoom all the way in on one of these. A full Marineford betrayal movie, beat by beat. And from the second Shanks walks through the smoke, to the exact moment he turns his blade, to the last shot of Luffy being carried away as the world watches. No skips, no time jumps, just a full cinematic what-if that rewrites the entire story in real time. And it doesn't have to stop at Marineford. What if we dive into Eni's lobby with a different Buster Call outcome, where the Straw Hats don't all make it out? Or Wano, without Kaido's defeat? With Luffy's rebellion crushed, and the Beast Pirates ruling the New World? Or Egghead, where Vegapunk actually escapes, leaking the Void Century to everyone at once, and forcing Shanks, Blackbeard, and the Gorosei to move instantly? So if you want those deep dive rewrites and movie-length timelines, make sure you're subscribed, notifications on, so you don't miss when we drop the next branch of this multiverse. Now it's your turn. Drop every Shanks theory you have below. Full villain, tragic antihero, secret double agent playing the Gorosei, or something even crazier. Share this video with that one friend who's been saying, Shanks is too perfect to be real, since episode 1, and tell them their time has come. Because when Luffy finally meets Shanks in canon, do you still believe it'll end with a smile?